recording. Great. And then I'll start my share and do a quick little intro, and then I'll turn it over to Jennifer. All right. So, sorry, it always takes a quick second. Perfect. All right. So we should be good to go in terms of seeing my screen real quick. Don't worry, you won't hear from me from too long. I was going to take a shower and get all pretty, but I had my Yellowstone hat on, and Jennifer and David love photographing in Yellowstone. So I thought it was very fitting to keep that hat. Yeah, keep that hat on there. So I want to say welcome. A lot of you have been with us for a long period of time in the speaker series and before. There's definitely some new people here. So I want to say welcome to the spring speaker series as part of Nature Photography classes. My name is Nick Stover. I'm the founder. So walking you through real quick of how we got where we are today. We started with Rachel Jones-Ross talking about night photography, astrophotography, and also a lot of the Milky Way and Aurora Borealis. Then we had Tony Sweet talking about infrared photography, Mike Mazul talking about storm photography. Last week, we had a fantastic presentation from Theo Bosboom on the art of intimate landscapes. Tonight, we get to hear from the diva of the dunes. That's a name I just came up with the other day for you. Jennifer Renwick, a very talented photographer who's going to walk through a lot of different parts and pieces in her process. Next week, we'll hear from Adam Gibbs, the well-regarded UK photographer living in Canada, about forest photography. And then we're going to end with none other than Josh Cripps on telephoto landscape. So it's really exciting as part of the speaker series. I appreciate the continued support that are coming out. We're going to be donating a lot of money this year, once again, to charities and the Inspired Creator. Those announcements will come out in the next couple of weeks. Inspired Creator is a creative fund designed to help people on creative projects as well. So my name is Nick Stover. So I am a full-time nature photographer. I'm based in San Luis Obispo, California. So I'm a little further north than Jennifer is currently, waving down south. And I founded nature photography classes around one key premise or model, and that is to help nature photographers who are interested in deeper connections create more impactful images so they can confidently and consistently express themselves. So I start each one of these talks to really bring forth what that means maybe for you as a nature photographer, someone that's either very, very serious and been doing it for a long time, or somebody that's just getting started, and that concept of deeper connection. So we as photographers, we're looking for a deeper connection to ourselves. We're looking for a deeper connection to our natural environment when we're out there, and also a deeper connection to our fellow photographers. So through the speaker series and the educational stuff, that's my hope, is to really bring forth and help you in that connection so you can create more impactful images. So some of what Jennifer will show, what we've seen in prior speakers as well, isn't the showstopper, beautiful sunset, quintessential postcard as much as images of impact that are communicating particular things, what you see, what you feel, what you may have encountered within the landscape. And that's what we're going for. Is I want to help you create the images of impact to portray and bring forth that what you see. With the last part of it being, well, let's give you those confidence and consistency to be able to express your skills as we go forward. So tonight, you're going to learn a lot of this. You're going to learn and hear about somebody who has a deep connection to the natural environment, somebody who wants to help you. She's an excellent, excellent teacher, fantastic person, her and her partner, David. And she's going to probably be able to help a little bit on that confidence and consistency as we go through. So with no further ado, I do want to turn it over to Jennifer Renwick to talk about dynamic dunes.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for that great introduction. And I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for not allowing me. Thanks for including me in this series. Very exciting. Let me just share my screen. Oh, can you go ahead and...
Yeah, I guess I have to, I don't know why it still does that. It's like, if I'm giving them panelist rights, sorry, one second. Okay, you're good to go now.
Okay. Let's see, is it okay? You just see my title slide. You don't see my notes or anything.
I don't. Looks great.
Okay, perfect. All right. So just a few things before we start. I am coming to you from San Diego here. David and I are currently on the road. We're getting ready to do a workshop in Death Valley next week. So I'm in my travel trailer. I do have 2 cats. Right now they're sleeping in various spots. So hopefully it stays like that. Sometimes they hear Zoom come on and they're just like, oh, it's our time to like interrupt. So I do apologize if you happen to hear or see a cat. Also, I'm getting over a cold, so I'm sorry. I'm just a little muffled. And excuse me if I cough. It was just one of those really stubborn spring colds. But yes, I'm excited to be here today. So today I'm talking about sand dunes. And I have a lot to cover. One of the first things I just want to say is this is such a vast subject, but it's one that I absolutely love teaching about just because they are so dynamic. They're one of nature's just ever-changing subjects that, no matter how many times you go out to photograph them, visit them, you always find something different and they keep me coming back. So with that, what we're going to go over today, I'm going to go over why photograph sand dunes, what makes them so alluring. We're going to prepare you for your own dune adventure if you're planning on going out soon or sometime in the future. I'm going to show you how to photograph dunes in different types of light and weather. I'll go over some scenes that I like to photograph in the dunes. There are 3 different kinds of scenes that you can go out and take home with you. I'll talk a little bit about finding composition on the dunes so you can kind of maybe hopefully take some of these and take them out with you and feel more confident about finding compositions. And then I'm going to go over a few post-processing examples at the end, hopefully if we have time. I am a talker. I do have a lot of slides to get through. I will try to do it quickly, but with good information. So off we go. So just a little bit about myself, if you guys don't know who I am. I'm originally from the Midwest. I moved to Colorado about 7 years ago. I have my degree in geology. That's me as a lowly geologist there on the left. You can say dorky geologist. I've got my Breton there on my hip. So, yeah, I was a nerd. I'm still a nerd. It's okay. And then I actually transferred into veterinary medicine, and I did that for 14 years before picking up a camera, starting with a photography hobby, and then finally taking the plunge to where I am now, which is a full-time photographer. I travel around with my partner, David Kingham. We travel in this travel trailer. That's what I'm sitting in right now. So we're based out of Golden, Colorado. We share a house with my father, but for, I would say, at least 8 to 9 months out of the year, we are on the road all throughout the American West teaching workshops. This allows us to be in locations for a long time. We get to know our surroundings intimately. We do not teach workshops anywhere that we don't know well enough. So we're able to pivot with weather conditions and give our students the best opportunity that they can. I travel with these 2 little fur balls because obviously you can't get out of veterinary medicine without bringing your pets with you. And there's my partner, David, and I in Yellowstone, and together we own the Nature Photographers Network, and we are exploring exposure together. And like I said, we teach landscape photography workshops. We provide some educational resources on our website. Nature Photographers Network is a great place to go if you're tired of social media, where you can connect with like-minded photographers. It's so different than social media. You can get constructive feedback on your images and just kind of, get a lot of support on how to be a better photographer and find friends. So we'll dive right into it now. So why do I enjoy photographing dunes? It really comes down to the fact that they're a very dynamic landscape. They're very alluring. They call to me all the time. The first time I ever went out and photographed on them, I was super overwhelmed, didn't know how quite it would end up. And I ended up coming home that day with sand in my shoes, sand in my soul, and sand in my heart, and thought, these are my new favorite subject to photograph. I could literally spend all day out there. And while the dunes themselves, since they're ever changing, well, the dunes themselves don't move around too much. They're pretty static, but they do kind of shift a little bit around their borders. The areas around them frequently change with wind, erosion, and deposition. So I find something every time I go out there that's different from the last season, especially in Death Valley, which is where I should say you'll see most of the, probably all these pictures from. It's one of my favorite places to photograph dunes. They also maximize your opportunities. I'm supposed to be clicking here. I totally forgot. Well, that's okay. So many different types of scenes. You can do anything from grand scenes to small scenes to abstracts. There's a never-ending abundance to photograph. And instead of walking away with one image from your trip, I find that I create many. I'm all about maximizing my opportunities when I'm out in the field photographing. I don't want to come back with one image from a scene. I instead want to kind of go ahead and, do little taste tests and take many photos of many different things. So when I get home, I kind of have a better collective collection of images to kind of share the story of the place versus just one. And I like being a well-rounded photographer, and, being able to photograph all 3 different types of scenes out there is just a bonus. I I find dunes to be very, very expressive subjects. Their sinuous lines and just the way they have a lot of visual flow to them naturally. They can be very expressive and moody. Processing them in black and white further adds to that drama and adds mood to whatever story you're trying to share. So I'm a geologist. So did you really think you were going to get away without at least one educational slide on dunes? So this is the geomorphology portion of the talk tonight. So basically sand dunes are different mounds of loose sand created by wind. When the wind doesn't have enough energy to blow, let's say, particles over the mountains, as the wind energy decreases, those particles will drop and deposit, creating sand dunes. You'll usually see them at the end of vast playas, usually pushed up against mountains. Not always, but that generally tends to be the case. And if you think of Death Valley, if you've been there, this is how most of Death Valley's dunes have formed. They're all at the ends of these vast valleys, very sandy, muddy playas. There's lots of wind in Death Valley if you've been there, so you know that. And they just form at the bases of these mountains way across the plain. They can also be found in coastal areas and most arid landscapes. They are determined by shape. The shape of the dune is kind of dependent on how strong the wind was when it was depositing the sand and the sand type. They're very, sand is not created equally. There's a ton of different variations in sand. So there are 5 types of dunes: transverse, linear, longitudinal. Those are kind of the same. There's star dunes, there's Barcan dunes, and there's parabolic. Barcan and parabolic look very similar, but the main difference is the direction of the wind in relation to the crescent shape. The top of the crescent faces the wind in the Barcans, and the top of the crescent is oriented in the same direction as the wind in parabolic dunes. Star dunes, the wind kind of came from all sorts of different directions to kind of create that little star shape. And the direction of wind is usually the main difference between transverse and linear dunes. I keep forgetting to hit my mouse. Sorry, guys. So sand dunes of the Colorado Plateau. I just kind of chose the West because, we live in the US and this is a very popular place to go visit dunes. And we have quite a few extensive fields. The areas in the yellow show mostly just Aeolian sand. So these aren't dunes per se, but just kind of sandy areas. And the orange areas that you see are active dune fields. Some of the more well-known locations that contain dunes are obviously around Death Valley National Park. You can find them in Great Sand Dunes National Park in southern Colorado. We've got White Sands National Park in New Mexico. And they occur in about 23 national parks across the US. They're pretty widespread. If any of you have been to any international dune locations, I know there's quite a bit. Go ahead and put that in the chat. That'd be kind of exciting to see. I have yet to visit other international dune fields, but it's on the list someday. So mesquite dunes, I'm just gonna hit on a few of dune fields that I'm gonna talk about in this presentation. So mesquite dunes are probably what everyone thinks about when they think of Death Valley dunes. They're easily accessible. They're not very steep. There is one big dune kind of toward the western side of the field, but for the most part, they're kind of gentle and rolling, kind of small, medium height. They're at a lower elevation, so they're pretty easy to hike. And these contain mostly crescent dunes, linear, and there are a few star dunes. There's also Eureka dunes and ibex dunes. Those are also in Death Valley National Park. They're kind of considered backcountry dune fields. Ignore I totally messed up on the captions. I meant to change or to title those what those are. So Eureka is on the left. That's the Eureka dune field. You've got a giant dune there, kind of lording over the smaller dune field. That dune, I think, is approaching 600 feet. It's the second highest dune, I believe, in the US. Great Sand Dunes National Park actually has the highest dune at about 700 feet. Ibex dunes, that's what those are on the right. Those are in the southern end of the park. They're kind of consisted of a very, very high dune, kind of a middle dune, and then they've got some lower dunes kind of as you head south. Both intriguing. They require a little bit more of an effort to get to, but they're fun. And then obviously we've got Great Sand Dunes in Colorado. These started about 8,000 feet in elevation to begin with, so it's quite a trek to try to make it up to the top dune. And these are massive dunes, and they back up against the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. So in the winter, those are covered in snow, very cool backdrop to see kind of desert sand dunes against those mountains. So if you ever get the chance to visit Colorado, go ahead and visit those. These dunes are actually great for monsoon season in Colorado. It's a great place to catch lightning, storms, and like I said, in the winter, you have the snow. Something kind of fun for the spring and summer. You can kind of see it in this picture back here. In the spring and the summer, depending on how much rain we've had, how our monsoon is doing, you will get these tiny little green plants on the dunes, which is pretty unique. I haven't seen that anywhere else. So they can be really fun to photograph. So before I dive into photographing dunes, I'm going to prepare you guys for your adventure on the dunes. And I know this seems kind of silly and you're probably thinking, like, really, you know, they're just sand dunes. Well, there's a lot that actually goes into it. And the more prepared you are, the more successful your dune outing will be. So yes, sand dunes fashion, it's a thing. There is no shame, and you just got to embrace it, especially when you're heading out into the wind. Now, this is not what I look like when I go out and photograph dunes on a non-windy day. Both of these were actually taken on super windy days. But being prepared and safe is really important when you're photographing these dune fields. So I'm just going to go over some key pieces of equipment to have with you and try to help you prepare for whatever condition you're photographing the dunes in. So this was back before COVID. David and I rocked those N95s way before COVID because there is something called valley fever when the winds do kick up. I'll touch on that a little bit later in my presentation. We wear goggles because we have contacts. I don't have to tell any of you how painful it is if you're a contact lens wearer when you get a piece of sand stuck in your eye. So we're very careful about that. And yeah, I also have asthma and allergies, so I need to be careful in the dust. But first rule, don't worry about how ridiculous you may or may not look. It's just all about being safe. So some things that I have depended on over the years when I go out into the dunes, like I said, is an eye protection buff. It's really just for sandstorms. You don't need this for everyday calm mornings, evenings on the dunes. It's mostly if you wear contacts. I mean, no one wants to get eye or sand in their eye anyway, but especially for my contacts lens wearers, definitely invest in just a cheap pair of even the 3M painting goggles, just something to protect your eyes. A buff can help protect your face, and it also, bonus, can protect you from sun exposure too. I always bring a snack and plenty of water out with me on the dunes. Even if you aren't sweating or you don't feel hot, staying hydrated in the desert is the #1 thing to do. And eating a salty snack on your way out doesn't, hurt either. You just want to keep your stamina up because it is, walking in sand dunes, I like to say, is 1 step forward and 5 steps back. They do require a bit of work, and you want to keep your body fueled. A headlamp, I stay out there till way past twilight when most photographers are packing up and leaving. I'm still out there shooting. So you definitely want a headlamp for those early mornings out and those late nights back to the car. Obviously bring your camera bag, your tripod. I'll go over kind of how to keep your gear safe in a few slides here. And then obviously a coat, hat, sun protection. Bring layers. Anyone that's been to the desert knows that, as much as it's perceived as a very hot place, as soon as that sun goes down, it cools off pretty quickly. So layers are the best. Try not to wear cotton, just because if you sweat, try to do something like a smart wool base layer that really helps. And then shoes. A lot of people have different opinions on shoes. The one thing I would caution against are Gore-Tex shoes. I have ruined many pairs of Gore-Tex boots, hiking boots out there on the dunes. What happens is the sand gets caught in between that Gore-Tex and it builds up. I've had to surgically extract the sand out of my Gore-Tex, and then obviously I've compromised the whole shoe. It's not waterproof anymore. David and I really just go out there in trail runners. Yes, you get sand in your shoes, but it's easy enough to just dump out and keep going. So I don't really have a good shoe preference. I do like Hokas just for if you're in Death Valley, the terrain in general. My Hokas are nice and padded. They've held up really well against the gravel and kind of the gnarly stuff that you walk over. And I have the Speed Goats, and I would say they don't collect too much sand, and it's really easy to dump out. Safety and navigation. This is probably the #1 thing. If you don't take anything away from this presentation today, definitely just keep in mind that if you ever go out to the dunes, invest in learning Gaia. That's an app on your phone. As much as we think we walk in straight lines, we really don't. When you're heading out to a dune field, you kind of lose track of your car, especially depending on what dune field you're visiting. While you may see it on the walk out and you think, oh, I can totally see my truck. 5 hours later or 3 hours later, when you're out in the dunes having fun and you're way out there, you may look and not be able to see it. And then when you're trying to walk back at night, you may get a little lost. I have found Gaia to be really helpful for this. You can see in the middle there, these are just example Gaia tracks from where we've parked along the highway and walked out to the Mesquite Dunes. You literally just follow your track back. Doesn't mean if there's doesn't matter if there's a windstorm going on or if it's super dark and you don't have a headlamp, you can literally just follow your track back on your phone. It's all satellite enabled, so it doesn't matter if you don't have service, you just have to download the maps ahead of time before you go out. And I'm always a big proponent of carrying a Garmin GPS, or it's not a GPS. Oh my gosh, I'm totally losing what this is right now. It's yeah, it's your satellite. It's your safety spot. If someone knows what it is, put it in the chat. I can't believe I'm having a brain fart over this. But yeah, if you get in trouble in the backcountry, you activate it, help will come. So InReach, thank you, Bill. My gosh, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like something very obvious. Thank you for saving that, Bill. Yes, and InReach. No matter what, desert, mountains, wherever you're adventuring, always just have one of these on you. It'll just help so much easier if you get into a situation with search and rescue. So moving on, this is a question that I get, and this is why I'm hitting it in the beginning of my presentation, is how do I protect my gear in the dunes, especially when there is blowing sand? Protect your tripod. How do you do that? My main thing would be you want to keep your joints out of the sand. I'll touch on that when we go over windy dunes. And if it's windy, just be mindful of changing lenses. I can honestly tell you that, I've been out there for 7 winters in some of the most gnarly sandstorms you can think. I shoot with a Nikon. I used to have a 500 and then an 850, and more recently I moved into the mirrorless system. Nikon's always been really weather sealed. I have had 0 problems with my cameras and lenses. I say if you worry, insurance is your best assurance. In all my 7 years of photographing dunes, though, like I said, I have never damaged any of my equipment, and I've been out in 70+ winds. The most I've ever had to contend with is just a little bit of sand in my, the telescoping part of my telephoto lens. It eventually works itself out, but that's the closest I've come to injuring my equipment. If you're weather sealed, you're golden. If you're not weather sealed, then you'll definitely want to take a few more precautions and be a bit more careful. I'm pretty hard on my gear. I do this full time, so I take it out in the elements, whether it's rain, ocean spray, snow, sand. I'm sure a few of you would cringe if you saw what my camera's been through, but it's what I do. And what good is our gear if we're not out using it? So while it's great to be mindful of protecting it, I know they're very expensive investments. I just don't want it to keep you from going out and experiencing this, because 9.5 times out of 10, you're going to be completely fine. Obviously there's that little tiny chance something may happen, but having the insurance also settles my mind. Someone just said hiking gaiters. Yes, those are awesome. I didn't even think of that, Trevor. So thank you for saying that. Yeah, always a good choice. Good for Death Valley too. Keeps the debris out of your shoes. So if you go out there, if you're worried about sand, go ahead, choose a lens and stick with it. If you're not feeling comfortable changing them out, opt for a lens with a good range, like maybe a 28-300 or a 24-200. Right now, 24-200 is kind of what I have in my Nikon Z lenses that I've actually fallen in love with. It's kind of like my go-to walk around lens. If it is windy, avoid the crests of the dunes. That's where the sand is running off the top. You'll get a nice little free exfoliation in your face. But that's only if it's windy. If you're really concerned about sand, avoid putting your, my bad, it's supposed to say bag, on the ground, especially if windy. I use a mind shift. It was in one of my photos here. I'll go back to here, but you can see it kind of in this slide. I've got a rotation 180. So this little fanny pack swings out where I can access my camera. I don't ever have to put my bag on the ground. That's really helped, especially out in the sand. I've also used it in the Zion Narrows. When I'm in a river photographing, I don't have to put anything down. It's just been one of my favorite bags to use. And then you're going to want to, if you do change lenses, practice, good lens changing behavior, keep your camera down, turn it off, try to shield it, if you're really worried about dust or anything getting in there. If you're mirrorless like me, your mirror is constantly covered in debris. I clean it all the time. I think it's just one of the things of being mirrorless. And, practice good lens changing technique. And another thing is a UV filter. I think I started out using a UV filter on my cameras and my lenses probably when I first started, and then got rid of them. I have never had any scratches on my front element from sand at all. I think while in the most extreme windstorms, you do get hit with a little sand, for the most part, it's really kind of like shins down. So it's not sandblasting your front element. It's not scratching. It's all personal preference. I mean, if you want that extra, just, assurance, peace of mind, go ahead, slap a UV filter on there, but you absolutely do not need one to head out there. Explore and travel with care. They are a very intense experience. Know your limits. I think that's just the main thing. It's easy to get lost exploring. And like I said, we don't always walk in a straight line. So just make sure you have some kind of navigation app on your phone that you're following. You can see here, this is literally all my tracks just in one season of visiting dunes. I kind of went everywhere. You can kind of see where I saw something exciting and then totally ventured off course. But yeah, just be safe out there. Always know where you are, let someone know where you are, all the things that we practice when we go out hiking anyway. Watch your step. It's easy to wander and walk into your composition out there. I have done it many times. I turn around and I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And then I look and I'm like, oh, I totally just walked through it. Cool. So just be mindful of that. If you're out with a partner or if you're in a workshop group, just be mindful of, where they're walking, where you want to walk, communicate, say, oh, I'm going to go over there, just so people know not to walk in your scene. And they're not as easy as you would think to clone out. Some are, but when you're dealing with a lot of ripples and ridges, it can quickly turn into a cloning nightmare. So just try to watch your step, be cognizant of other photographers around you as well. When you're out there walking, even if you're by yourself, try to avoid, if you see in the right picture here, try to avoid walking directly on the ridges. That's the part that's the hardest to fix post-processing. So even if I'm standing on a dune and someone else walked on the dune in front of me, if it's on the face of the dune, pretty easy to clone out. I'm not going to get too bent out of shape, but if the ridges are all completely marked, that's just going to make it hard. And there are non-photographers out there too. So of course they're not, they don't understand that, and that's fine. The dunes are for everybody. But just be cognizant if you're out there, try to avoid ridges if possible and keep them clean for you and other visitors. Arrive early and stay late. There are opportunities at every single point of the day for sand dunes. You're going to get tired of me talking about that during this presentation, but and I'll show you plenty of examples. Make sure you take your time. They're a vast subject. And when you get out there, it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's easy to feel like you don't know what you're doing or where you're going or kind of what you want to focus on. So if you give yourself that time in the beginning to kind of check it out, give yourself that permission to stay out later in the morning or get up earlier, or just stay out, arrive earlier in the afternoon and stay out past sunset. You'll see all sorts of opportunities. And that gives you the time to wander and not get rushed or frustrated. I think we've all been there where we've been out. We don't really have a composition dialed in yet. The sun is going down and all of a sudden it's like the Amazing Race and we're trying to get, we're like, oh God, I need to get this. The light's going to hit here. Oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. So arriving early, scouting out many compositions in different areas, facing different directions is something that can help set a more positive tone for your whole outing. All right, so photographing dunes. So the age-old question, what lens do I use to photograph dunes? What lens do I bring? So from the smallest details to the grandest scenes, all lenses, all focal lengths can actually be useful for photographing sand dunes. So I always say, bring all of them. If you can pack your gear and you're comfortable walking out with a few choices, go for it. I know now with the mirrorless systems, it's a big difference than our heavy DSLRs where we were literally breaking our backs to walk out there with lenses, but now it's super, super easy. I know with my Nikon Z, I can carry my body and 3 other lenses with me and have so many different opportunities, and it all fits in that one little fanny pack on my bag. So very nice, especially those of us with bad backs. I've used everything from wide angle to mid-range to telephoto. The only one that I don't think I've ever actually used out there is a macro, and I'm a very abstract macro photographer, but believe it or not, on the dunes, I haven't done that. I have used my telephoto to create macro-like scenes by zooming all the way in very close to something. I would say the other second least lens that I use, and this might shock some of you, maybe not if you know me, I really don't bring my wide angle, or I don't shoot with my wide angle a lot. I think I have like 2 photos in this presentation that I actually used a wide angle on, just because I'm a small scenes photographer. But, I do get that itch occasionally for a wide angle scene. So I'll still bring it with me if I think I'm going to do something. But if I could only bring one lens with me, it would be that 24-200 to give myself plenty of focal lengths for different opportunities. So here's a good example. So I've got, that wider angle scene. I used a 20mm lens. I went in super telephoto on the side of a dune at 250 with that lens. And then I went really telephoto from the top of a higher vantage point shooting down on the dunes for a really cool perspective. And that was 600mm. So wide angle lenses, there's plenty of opportunities out there. Wide angles make you feel, you kind of want to, I should say, you want to invite the viewer to feel like they're standing there with you, that they're in the scene. The dunes are vast and beautiful. So it is kind of fun to include wider angle scenes out there. We'll go into competition, or God, I don't know why it's a competition. We'll go into composition later and I'll touch on a few things. But when you want that really wide angle shot, you want to capture a lot of the scene with you, make your viewer feel like they're standing there with you. Could definitely, reach for your wide angle. Mid-range is where I feel a little bit more comfortable and just kind of my jam. There are plenty of mid-range scenes out there. You can include the sky. You don't have to include the sky. I'll get in that when I talk about small scenes, but plenty of opportunities for mid-range. A lot of the times the wide angle can, if you're familiar with using it, especially with mountain scenes, it will make your mountains kind of small. It can also do the same thing to your dunes, just because your field of view is huge. That's where I kind of like my mid-range. So like 24 is a pretty good focal length that I like to use. And that's usually the front end of, your mid-range lenses, the furthest end from your wide angle, if you have like a 14-24. But I really enjoy my mid-range and I use it out there a lot. I particularly enjoy the focal lengths between like 60 and 120. If you're ever curious about what you use most of the time, a good little tip is to look in your Lightroom catalog, and you can actually search by focal length, and it's kind of eye-opening to see what pops up at the top of the list. I would say one thing, but my photos prove otherwise. So if you're ever curious or you want that to help make your decision, go ahead and try that. Telephoto opportunities. There's plenty of telephoto opportunities out there. Very abstract opportunities, especially if you're photographing the sides of dunes, ripples in the sand below you, ripples across a dune from you. Plenty of telephoto things to do. You can also stand on a taller dune and shoot other dunes kind of further away from you. And I'll have plenty of those examples as well. Here's a good example of when I say I don't use my macro lens, but I do use my telephoto lens to take macro-like scenes. So this was a very unique scene, happened after a rain one year. I've never seen anything like this in the dunes again, but it literally looked like wood grain. And all it was just super compressed sand grains. I don't really know why they were different colors. You can even see, there little drip down sand patterns up at the top there, but I used my telephoto lens to go ahead and photograph this. So just a good opportunity to, you can use that longer focal length even to shoot down at your feet, because I've never actually used a macro out there properly. So dunes provide many different opportunities for many different scenes. So again, those grand scenes that we're talking about, make your viewer feel like they're standing right there with you. You want to encompass the whole thing, the whole feeling of a place. Grab that wide angle lens. Smaller scenes. So when I talk smaller scenes, and everybody has a different opinion of this, I typically keep the sky out of my scenes that are smaller. That does not mean to say that you cannot have the sky in a smaller scene. It just kind of depends on the situation. But for me, for all intents and purposes, I like to say smaller scenes, you eradicate the sky. That does a few things. It just kind of, helps you focus in on one detail in a bigger landscape. By not including the sky, you're getting rid of that pesky problem with high dynamic range, so it's easier to work with. And it just brings more focus to those subjects that you want to tell the story of. Dunes are chaotic. The most successful photos usually focus on, one subject. Try to simplify your scene, try to eliminate context. And that's kind of, you can work with that in abstracts, but smaller scenes, you can kind of do the same thing. For instance, that one on the right side there, that smaller purple dune, that was actually quite a large dune, but I used my telephoto lens to isolate it, remove context, and you actually wouldn't really know, is that a small dune, a big dune? But I typically leave the sky out. Another example here, these are just two nice little small scenes from the dunes, nice little curves and patterns. The dune or the two dunes on the left were actually taken on a cloudy day. I'll touch on that in weather. But even on a slightly cloudy day, you can still get that dune glow. And, that didn't require a lot of post-processing. That blue that you see are the actual shadows, and the warmth is where the sun was hitting. And then abstracts, there are plenty of opportunities out there. So the photo on the left was actually after a rain a few years ago. I actually think I was out photographing this with Sarah Marino. We venture out a lot on the dunes together, but the dune, especially the Mesquite Dunes, since it's Death Valley, there's a lot of evaporites in the ground, even with the sand, from runoff from different playas during floods. So there were these kind of crusty layers kind of coming up out of the sand. And I really enjoyed just how they kind of reminded me of almost like a painting, like a watercolor painting of the dunes, or maybe an aerial view. So those were really fun to photograph. You can, just shooting down towards your feet, all of a sudden you feel like you're in an airplane shooting drone images or aerial images. That's kind of how the one in the middle is. That was literally just right at my feet. I think that was even like maybe my focal length was like 60 or 80. So nothing too extreme. And then again, there's that example of using that 600 millimeter telephoto lens on an area of dunes from a higher perspective. So lots of opportunities. So these opportunities exist all day, from before sunrise to after sunrise. And this kind of shocks a lot of people. So most of my Death Valley portfolio, I would say 80% of it was shot during bad light and bad photography days, as some people would say. So I'm a big proponent that there is no bad light, there is no good light. David and I like to teach, there's only different opportunities of light to work with. You'll have a more gratifying experience out on the dunes if you head out with an open mind, just like anything in life. Learn to observe and anticipate those lighting conditions, because doing so, you'll open up so many opportunities for yourself and your photography, and you're going to be a happier, well-rounded photographer. If you head out there thinking, oh, it's blue skies, there's nothing to shoot, my whole trip here to Death Valley, I haven't been able to get that, awesome sunset, that, unicorn moment, for sunrise, that's okay. David and I do this almost 365 days a year. I can count on one hand each year how many of those, Instagram, social media, crazy, I hate using this word, but to drive home the point, banger sunsets that you see really happen. So why not learn to work with different types of light, become a well-rounded photographer? You'll just be happier, because as soon as we're angry about, something not going our way, it kind of shuts down our creative brain as well. You box yourself in with these expectations. So free yourself from that. TJ Thorne, I'm sure a lot of you know him. He's a great example of working with different kinds of light, especially in forests. Sarah Marino preaches this. A lot of us preach this, that there is no bad or good light. Let's stop categorizing it that and just say there are different opportunities of light. So dunes go through a vast stage of light, or light stages, during a day. I've been out there and I've gotten to photograph them pretty much in every light stage of the day. So I'm going to run through those with you now. And this is why they're so intriguing to photograph. They are reflective surfaces. And, that sand usually is made out of silica, super reflective. And whether you have a pink sunset or a blue clear sky sunset with nothing going on in the sky, but you still have that blue reflected light, all of these things the sand grains will pick up that light, and so will the dunes. That's why that abstract version of the dunes that we saw a few slides ago, that really pink one, that was a super pink sunset. And they reflected that, and your camera will pick that up. I'm going to show a few examples here. That twilight light is super powerful. And even though you can't really see it with your eye, your camera sensor picks it up, and that's what half of the fun is. So we're going to put our gear on. We're going to march out to the dunes. We're there way in the dark before anyone else is out there. What are we going to see first? We're going to see and start with this morning twilight light. So this kind of light is usually kind of a silvery blue, depending on what you have going on in the sky. Of course, if you do have some high clouds reflecting some pink and purple, you can definitely pick those up. But for the most part, you're going to see these silvery kind of tones. And this is a longer exposure. Usually when I start out there in the dunes, the first thing, my exposures will be anywhere from even 15 seconds. And then as it gets lighter and lighter, I trend more towards, 5 seconds, 3 seconds, 1 second, but your camera will capture these. And once you see it pop up on the back of your LCD screen, you're going to smile and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, because our own eyes can't really see it. And that's where our cameras are super helpful. So this stage happens, usually right first way. If you get out to the dunes, if you're going out there for sunrise, this is the first thing you're going to see if you take the time to photograph it. As you move more towards sunrise, your colors are going to change a little bit. On this particular morning, there was a lot of atmospheric haze. There was a kind of a purple tint to the sky to begin with, and that's how these dunes picked this up. This was about a 10-second exposure. If you look really closely, there's kind of a little wispy at the top there. It was a little breezy, but this is typically the next stage in the morning. This is that same stage as those purple dunes, except I wanted to show an example of an abstract. So these were some ridges to kind of set the scene that were kind of circling up around onto a smaller dune. I stumbled upon these walking out, and I just thought, oh my gosh, these look amazing to me. It almost looks like an ice cave. I don't know, it's so abstract, and I just love the flow of the lines. So the pink at the top, a lot of people think that this is heavily photoshopped. It is not. This is what your camera sensor will see. So the blues that you see are all what are in the shade, and also the light reflecting from the sky. The pink is just that little bit of sunset light that's just hitting the face of the dunes. So, the blue part is obviously below the warmer part, and your camera sensor will pick up these subtle colors. It's amazing. You would think that this was shot maybe sometime midday, but this was, again, a longer exposure. I think this was about 5 seconds. So really get out there and just take some test shots. You'll be amazed at what your camera can pick up at those longer exposures. So after those kind of exciting pastel stages, we then enter something called pre-sunrise. And this is a time, and I know I just preached about good light, no bad light. This will probably be the only time you hear me say this. This is when it's a little bit flatter. This is usually the time when, my students will look at each other and say, oh, is it time for coffee? And we make small talk. This stage lasts about 15-20 minutes. And you can definitely still photograph with it, but those kind of twilight lights that you were picking up are now kind of faded, and now we're waiting for the sun to make its arrival. And then when it crests the horizon or the mountains or whatever you have in your horizon, this is when the magic starts. So this is right after the sun has crested the mountains on the Mesquite Dunes. You're hit with this, golden light, these deep blue, not deep blue yet, but these kind of turquoise shadows. It's really magical to see. It just starts, at one end, and it just kind of slowly kisses its way over the dune field. You have to be ready for it. Usually I'm sitting there with a countdown, like, okay, guys, like, here comes the sun. I can see it. So get ready. And I usually have my students get a bunch of different compositions ready in their mind that they want to shoot, because this stage happens quickly, because the timing from going from this really nice soft pastel stage to full blown, the sun is coming. It's pretty quick. I mean, it happens within about 5 minutes. And once you hit this stage, you can see your blues are a lot deeper. Your light is turning a little bit more golden. If you're facing the sun, the dunes in front of you, if you've got nice like lines or ridge lines, they're being backlit. So really cool to work with. You're just getting these soft kisses of light on the dunes. It's one of my favorite times out there, and it does happen quickly. But it's just so fun to watch and see. And, sometimes I know we're out there to get the shot, but you just gotta, take it all in. And it's just so fun to watch how the light just kind of changes the landscape in front of you. So what you were shooting 10 minutes ago is completely something else transformed by the sun. So as the sun is now up, we start getting, we kind of drift out of the darker blues, that more golden light. And now we kind of switch over to more golden hues. So this would almost kind of be like a golden hour, so to speak. And so now is the time of the morning where we start looking for our shadows. Our shadows are starting to make an appearance. And you have a window here where you have this kind of softer light, but you transition pretty quickly into full-blown morning light. And this is about the time when you start smelling the bacon and you want to go back for breakfast. But we encourage our students to stay out just a little longer, because this is where it really starts to transform, and you start to see, if you want to do black and white, this is where you start to see those black and white scenes, because now your lights are a little harsher, you've got more contrast. And this is kind of fun to work with in black and white. So that's the scene right here is very similar to the one that you just saw, except in black and white. And then this stage kind of continues on and just gets a little harsher as you head towards noon. And now we're into midday light. I enjoy going out in midday light on the dunes. I know a lot of people would just kind of be like, really? To me, that's the best black and whites. This was at the Eureka Dunes. This is that taller, kind of on the side of one of those taller dunes. And this was literally 12 noon, high noon. And you just get those really sharp contrast. You get those tonal changes. It just works perfectly for black and white. So I have spent many hours in the late afternoon. In fact, one of my favorite stories, Sarah Marino and I went out to the dunes once, and it was a pretty windy day, but we started probably at like 2 p.m. And it was this stage, and we just had a blast with it. And we were out there a really long time, and we were very tired by the end of the day, but there are just so many opportunities. Midday light is also one of the times that I really like to work with abstracts that I find. Those harsher tones and contrasts just do wonders on these. When you first look at this, you may not know what you're looking at, but these are just sand ripples. I've actually turned it upside down just because I enjoyed that presentation of it. You'll see when I do a post-processing example of this, I don't do anything crazy. I don't warp mountains. I'm not super technical with Photoshop, but one thing I like to do with these abstract scenes is turn them around, turn them upside down, flip them left or right. Depending on what was going on, maybe I couldn't actually make it to the other side of that to photograph it from this angle. And when you're presented with these abstract opportunities, I do encourage you, take a photo from each side. These patterns will look completely different from different angles. So embrace that. And here, this one just reminded me of like an optical illusion. If you spend one time looking at it on the left, they almost look like puffy paint. And if you go to the right, they're just these jagged peaks, kind of like mountains. And I know we all view things differently, and maybe my eyes are bad, but that's just what I really enjoy about these. But midday light is perfect for these sand abstracts. So you've been out there, maybe you went back and got a snack at Stovepipe Wells, you kind of went back for some lunch, and now you're going to head out for your afternoon journey on the dunes. So late afternoon light, it almost kind of goes into a reverse pattern now. So we did the twilight light, the golden light, the sunrise, everything in the morning. Now we're going to see this light kind of work backwards. So we're back in that late afternoon light, almost like the morning. You've got your really nice golden tones. You've got your deeper blue shadows. This is still good black and white time, if you're thinking about that. And then we kind of start traveling towards sunsets. Now we have our pre-sunset light, a little bit deeper blues, a little bit deeper golden tones, still excellent for black and white. You can see on this one, someone walked on the ridge. And then we start moving towards sunset. And just like in the morning, when we've got that backlighting and that rim lighting, sunset, you have this opportunity all over again. It still happens pretty quickly. There's a certain angle of the sun just before it disappears, either behind the mountains or the horizon, that you have to work with this backlighting. But it's my favorite. It just tells the story of these layers and lines in the dunes. You can trace compositions better. You can see zigzags. You can just, it's really fun to work with. And it still happens pretty quickly at this stage. And then we get into the last kiss of light before the sun completely disappears. And you'll see that this light is generally more of a salmon colored. I believe it was Sean Bagshaw that coined that term. I don't remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a term for this, and it's called, salmon light. And I like to refer to that too. And it's just this last little kiss of light. You can start to see your shadows getting a little more subtle, more pastel. You're trending more towards that twilight light. And then the sun completely goes away. And guess what? We have another like 10 to 15 minute period where it's a little bit flat, still very workable, but yeah, this is the time where you start asking your partner what you want for dinner, and what are your plans after this, and make small talk. And then we enter twilight. So just like morning, we're getting back to those super pastels, your longer exposures, and whatever is going up in the sky above you will reflect back on those dunes. And this is why it's crucial. You don't really appreciate this unless you have a totally clear sky day. When I referred to that one dune shot of the abstracts with the pink, those were super high clouds, and high clouds always seem to catch those colors so much more intensely in the desert than like a sky full of clouds. But this example right here, this was a clear sky day. So you really need a clear sky to go out and appreciate all these stages of light on the dunes in one day. And I challenge you, if you ever find yourself in Death Valley or find yourself in the dunes, give yourself that opportunity to go out there and study and just take photos. They don't have to be award winning, but just kind of take your own photos to kind of appreciate all these stages of light, because it's just simply amazing. And until you've been out there and experienced it, I know it can be kind of hard to appreciate, but I'm telling you, as soon as you see these things pop up on the back of your screen, especially during twilight, it's just going to change your world. And then you'll be like me, where you're walking back in the dark because you were out there having way too much fun. And this is the stage that a lot of photographers just don't spend the time to photograph. And I'm really not sure why. I get it. Sometimes you've had a long day and you want to go back to the car. So now that we've kind of gone over that, I'm going to touch on weather a bit. So overcast skies, we're going back to this one image. So like, think of photographing with a softbox or a diffuser. You don't want, you don't have that strong twilight light, but you get those, lighter colors and the pastels, and they're very glowy. And these are your, kind of higher clouds. These aren't your, mid-level clouds or low clouds. And then on those days when you do have, you're kind of stocked in with clouds, doesn't mean you shouldn't head out there. You're just going to see different lighting conditions. So with heavy overcast skies, you'll see it's kind of flat. You don't get a lot of shadows and you don't get a lot of glow. But what you do get is you can start to appreciate these dunes. So this was after a rain. You've got some ripples, but you also have some scarring patterns. We'll kind of get into that in a few slides. But, it's still kind of interesting to see what you can catch out there. So definitely don't discount them. And of course, clear sky days. What I just preached, they're great to work with. You just saw the whole transition of light that occurs with these, so don't discount those. I know it can be frustrating when you've spent a lot of money to end up in one place and you just have blue skies, but hopefully this gives you a few ideas to play with if you are met with that, just so you can stay a happy photographer. So after the rains, I know it's kind of odd that, we're talking about rain in the desert. It happens so infrequently, and, it does happen. This winter was actually one of the rainiest that I've ever seen. Sorry, I opened up my questions to see, even though Nick told me he'd take care of them. I just wanted to see. I don't know if you saw that on your screen, but so here we are. We've had a pretty massive rainstorm and the dunes do get wet. And when they're wet, they look wet. They've got darker patches, lighter patches as they dry out. They aren't the most glamorous subjects to photograph during that time, but they do create some interesting things. So in this photo, if you look at it first glance, you might think, oh, look at all these photographers that just wandered across this whole dune field. Look at what they did. I thought that too. David and I went out there once and saw this and went, oh my gosh, like it has not been that busy. Where did these people come from? And with the further inspection, we discovered, no, the rain did this. So as the rain falls down, it'll pool on the ridges and the crests of the dunes, and it creates this super gnarly pattern that almost looks like someone did walk across it, but it's not. It's just runoff. Sometimes there are puddles, and it really kind of scars up the dunes until things fully dry out and you get another windstorm to fully erase them. Does that mean you shouldn't go out and photograph? Of course not. You can still find some really cool things, and actually heading out after the rains is one of my favorite things to do. So all three of these were taken after a rain and it dried out a bit. But one thing that I haven't mentioned yet, especially on the Mesquite Dunes, I think it's the same case at Eureka 2 and Ibex. If you've ever looked at these dunes and you've seen, from a distance, and you've seen kind of some black areas that kind of look like, scar patterns, or it looks like someone might have done graffiti. It's actually magnetite. If you head out there with a magnet, I actually did it this season when I dropped my phone on the dunes. I've got the mag light charger. I picked up my phone and had a ring of black, what I thought was sand, but it was actually magnetite stuck to the circle. And that's what moves around. So it's got a heavier density than the sand. So as the wind moves it around, rain, whatever, it kind of shifts its patterns and can kind of give dunes kind of a cool look. So in this abstract one on the left, this was right after a rain. You can kind of see where the water kind of pooled and kind of sent out these circles and these really curvy lines. It was really cool. I had a little bit of dappled light hitting this spot. The image in the middle is an example of where rain sat on a ridgeline. I know it's kind of hard to see, but if you look at it carefully enough, this is the divot and depression. And this depression was about 6 to 8 inches. So it was pretty substantial. And, for whatever reason, the sand on the side of this is nice and clean, and then it didn't get rippled. But you can find a lot of these cool patterns out there. And then the one on the right is just another example of right after a rain. You've got some of the whiter areas of sand, you've got darker areas. This was actually the same day that I found that sand grain image. So definitely don't discount the dunes after a rain. While I know they don't look the prettiest, they're just kind of recharging and resetting themselves, but go out and look for these abstract opportunities. You'll see some pretty cool things, and sand does some pretty wild things when it dries, especially in an area like Death Valley, where you have a lot of those evaporites and stuff. Wind events, here we go. I feel like everyone's been waiting to talk about wind. This is a very popular subject. So to photograph during a sandstorm, you have to appreciate the intensity. You'll have to understand that you're going to come back dirty, and it's a very unpredictable experience. I always like to joke, don't pay for an expensive spa treatment, just go out to the dunes on a windy day. You'll get free exfoliation of your face and any exposed body part. You'll walk away with sand in your hair, eyes, hopefully not your eyes, but your ears definitely, and your coat pockets and pant pockets, anything else that wasn't zipped. And it's very intense. And if you can deal with the conditions by preparing, you'll find it extraordinarily rewarding photographically, and sometimes just plain fun. So to kind of showcase this, I've got 2 videos. Hopefully they play. So in this video, this is what I would say is a mild storm. And you can hear it, pretty intense. And you can see the sand kind of blowing across. Everything gets cleaned right away. It's really cool. That's David out there. So I would say that this is a mild storm in comparison. So for this, I would say the winds were probably about 30 miles per hour, 35 miles per hour sustained with gusts of 40. We took our workshop group in 2 years ago, and this is a little more intense. There's our group trying not to blow away. And as awful as it looks, and David and I are not mean people, they all chose to go out there of their own free will. Everyone walked away that day just thankful for the experience. If a lot of people come back and say it was in one of their, top 10 lists of experiences in life, it's just crazy to be out there. And now that day, the winds were sustained at about 45 miles per hour with gusts up to 60. So a much more intense windstorm. So you know what, it's fun. If you have the chance to do it once, go for it. So like I kind of pointed out there, there's more of a gentle windstorm and a stronger windstorm, and the opportunities are a bit different during each one. So the photo on the left was taken during more of a gentle event. You can see at the top of this bottom dune here, there's a wispy, super technical term, that's what I call them, but you just kind of get gentle puffs and wisps along the ridges and the top lines. That second video produces more of what you see in this image on the right. You can just see the sand blowing across the ridges, like someone blowing out a birthday candle, and the wind goes in the direction that the wind is blowing. So definitely different opportunities. So you want to capture the power of the wind on the dunes. It's all about capturing the power and the movement of the sand and the wind. Utilize the backlight of the setting sun or the rising sun, if it's windy in the morning, against the blowing sand to create those really compelling compositions. And it lights up all those wispies, especially if you're backlit. And then at the same time, don't forget to look down at your feet, because you're going to see the wind etching those ripples as you speak. That sandstorm that I just showed you, the more intense one, it erases your footprints. I would say, I think I timed it during that workshop. I was just curious. It erased our footprints in about 20 minutes. Like, there was absolutely no sign of us. Another reason to go out and get Gaia, or find another GPS app to use on your phone, because if you're thinking you're just going to follow your footprints back to the car on a day like that, they are going to be gone. And it also gets very hazy and atmospheric, so you can't always see where you're going. So definitely just another plug to go ahead and keep yourself safe with Gaia. So just another example, a telephoto shot of just that intense wind on the ridges. Like I said, don't forget to look down. You can't really see the sand blowing here. This was kind of during a lull. This was a much more gentle windstorm, but it was constantly creating these radiating patterns. Very cool. And another thing to work with, especially if you're in a mountainous area, like, again, these are Mesquite Dunes in Death Valley. You've got mountains that kind of butt up against almost your whole perspective. Look for potential opportunities with the blowing sand in the atmosphere. This creates atmospheric perspective, and this gives you a sense of depth and layers in a scene. This is how painters created depth in their artwork. And the blowing atmosphere kind of creates the same task. Those things closer to you are more in focus, have more contrast. Things further away from you, less contrast. And that's a good way in these 2D images to create depth and visual interest. Also, when you're working with the wind, they're so dynamic, your conditions are constantly changing on the dune that you're shooting. So you want to kind of keep up with that, and you want to, kind of increase your shutter speed. You want to take multiple exposures to catch each different pattern of wind gust. And this will also help, give you that sharp exposure, especially when it's so windy and your tripod's wobbling a bit. So take multiple exposures in succession to catch the wispies blowing off the dunes. They're going to be in a different pattern every few seconds. And I use continuous high for this. So it's kind of like spraying and praying. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. And I do it on the dunes. David usually laughs at me because it sounds so ridiculous. I'm sitting there taking a photo and it's like, da, 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 and he's like, oh, did you get it? It's like, I'm just trying to play and see. So yeah, have confidence in yourself. Who cares? But this way, when I get home, I can pick from a variety of photos. I can see in this one, the sand wasn't blowing too much, but I just killed this, I caught this killer gust here, and look at this like spiral of sand. I just, I like to have as many possibilities that I can work with when I get home. So that's probably one of my biggest tips for working with the wind. Go ahead, spray and pray. So head out in mid-afternoon for brighter light. It makes for stunning black and white images. It gives you time to scout. It gives you time to see. Stronger light, really brings that light or that stronger contrast. Use your continuous shutter. Turn on image stabilization on your camera or your lens if you have it. I know that's something that we're told not to do when we're on a tripod, but especially if you're shooting telephoto, so think like your 400 range, your 600 range, it can actually help counter that wind and help, so you're not shaking your tripod, or you're not catching the blurriness. Most cameras nowadays, especially the mirrorless ones, are all equipped with super awesome image stabilization that helps. If you're not quite there yet with a mirrorless, my DSLRs, I used to just take my camera bag. I had a little hook. I would hang it on my tripod. I would also just hang onto the tripod. You can increase your ISO a bit if you are getting shaky, but there are a number of things that you can do to kind of counteract that. And get close to the ground. If you can, don't forget to change your perspective a bit. I know as photographers, we kind of get stuck in our own ways sometimes. And I know that I see quite often, when a photographer gets out to a scene, they'll take their tripod, they'll plant it, and then they don't move for like the next hour. So definitely get around, adjust the length and height of your tripod. Dunes look very different. If you want the more in your face leading line going up a dune, get down lower with a wide angle. If you're looking to shoot more layers, get out that telephoto, go up higher. Definitely don't forget to move around. Make sure to, plant that tripod down in the sand for stability. Just watch your tripod joints. So anywhere where you're, unclipping or twisting your tripod to extend your leg, keep that out of the sand. So automatically when you get out to the dunes, just put out your lowest section and just leave it out. There's nothing worse than cleaning out sand from those joints and then packing up at the end of the day and hearing that, and you're just going, oh, because you're gonna have to take your tripod apart and clean it. If you've ever done that, we all know what a laborious process that is. It's not fun. So try to avoid sticking your joints in the sand. Wear a mask. Like I said, if you're an allergy sufferer, asthmatic, it helps. Valley fever is definitely a real threat. A lot of people think it's mostly just Arizona with all the dust storms that they get, but someone was just telling me that there was a case actually in the Mojave that was this year. So be careful out there. What it is essentially, it's like this, it's a fungus, it's coccidiomycosis, I believe. It blows into the air that you breathe in during those dust storms. It can settle in your lungs. If you have a, not so great immune system, it can really put you into a world of trouble with your lungs. Most people clear it, but always a good idea to wear a mask. If it is that windy, you just don't want to take the chance. And if you're an allergy sufferer like me, just keep the dust out of your nose. Protective glasses really help. Like I said, keep all your pockets zipped on your coats and pants and bag. And the biggest piece of advice in the wind that I can give you, never turn your back on your tripod. Even if you've got it planted in that sand, all it takes is one gust, your tripod is over. Wind is not to be trusted, as I always say. I had my students watch this happen to my own camera about a season ago, where I had it set up. I was showing someone something. I went to go help the next person next to me. I completely turned my back, camera went down, lens face down into the sand. It was a nightmare. I spent a lot of time cleaning sand out of my camera and said lens. But even when you think, oh, it'll be fine, I'm just turning around for a second, just be mindful of that. It happens really quickly. And that's a good lesson anywhere there's wind, whether you're on the dunes or up on a mountain, just always be mindful of that. Don't trust Mother Nature, she'll get you. And it's all fun and games until someone gets sand in their eyes. So this happened to me last year. Had to drive to Vegas, find an eye doctor. Definitely scratched my cornea. Was not a fun experience. Was quite painful. So if you're thinking, I don't want to wear glasses to be dorky, embrace the dorkiness. It saves you a trip and a lot of pain. So yeah, it is no joke. And it finally caught up to me. The ironic thing is, for this photo, I actually did have glasses on when I went in the dunes. I stupidly took them off to look at someone's LCD, and that's when I caught a gust of wind out of a crest of a dune. Game over. And then I rubbed it. Again, just avoid it altogether. So one thing that I like to do when I'm in the dunes is I can go out and try to see when my windy conditions are going to happen. This is a NOAA hourly weatherly graph. Windy app is another good resource. This graph shows a point. It doesn't give the overall picture of an area. So I would say that's one of the limitations of this, but otherwise it's pretty accurate. And I could go into this for hours. There are a few tutorials out there on how to do this kind of stuff. My partner, David Kingham, actually put one out, I think 2 years ago, on using like the Windy app for like scouting. You can go to our website, find that, but he goes way into the weeds on this, and it's a pretty intense thing to learn. But basically this blue line right here that you see with the yellow area is a representation of the wind. So by looking at this chart, I can tell you, the left is sunrise, the right is sunset. It's going to be windy in the morning. So this would be a morning that I would look at this and say, okay, maybe I might want to head out there and, we'll see. So a good resource to use. It also shows that it's going to be fairly cloudy. That's one of these other lines down here. So one little tip, 20 miles per hour or higher can offer stormy conditions on the dunes. That's when you're going to see your your little wispies off the crest. Higher sustained winds will create that atmosphere, kind of that feeling of the dust storm moving across the plains, with the sand in the air catching the light. You can also use windy. So this will show you the overall big picture with this. So I took this yesterday. I'm on the coast of California right now. You can see that there was a heck of a lot of wind right offshore. You can see little pockets of the wind here in the mountains. Just easier to look at. So Death Valley, you can see all our little hearts right here that signify Death Valley. These are just different locations that we keep eyes on. So, if you happen to see through windy that you're going to get like a nice magenta red blob here, definitely be on the alert, because that signifies it's going to be pretty darn windy, and that would be a great day to go out into the dunes. No forecast is 100%, but windy gets us pretty close in that NOAA graph too. And if you see that they are agreeing, that's usually your number one sign to get out there, and it's going to be a windy day. So finding compositions on the dunes, this is something that even I still struggle with occasionally. Composition is a hard topic, and you can go for hours on this. So I'm just going to touch on a little bit of tidbits that have helped me, and hopefully that will help you, kind of see when you're out on the dunes. So one thing that I like to do is visual inventories. And, you might have heard other photographers talk about this. So this is a scene from Ibex Dunes. And what I do is when I first get on one of these scenes, because, just kind of like a mountain vista, when you get out to the dunes, it's expansive, and you can kind of get lost in your own brain going, oh my gosh, like, what do I photograph first? So the first thing that I like to do is do a visual inventory. It's a literal grocery list of everything that you see. And it just gives you little ideas to work with. It breaks things down into the elementary. It can kind of, slow your spinning mind down to focus on, okay, I've got some light over here. I like the shape of that dune. Oh, there's some wispies down here. Look at these cool ripples. It just slows your mind down and kind of puts you in a good place to start looking for compositions. And a lot of people will ask, do I still do this as a photographer? And you'll see on a few slides here. And the answer is absolutely. I'm not immune to getting out there and being overwhelmed. It's all part of photography. And, I heard one professional photographer once say that there's only one photo spot at any given location on Earth, and I couldn't disagree more. Every grand scene like this has all these little stories within the landscape. Challenging yourself to find those stories and to fine tune your eye is what it's all about, and that helps you grow your vision. So one of my favorite things about teaching our photography workshops is that we'll take a group out and we'll allow time for everyone to explore by foot at each spot. We encourage following those flashes of perception, photographing what makes you pause and say, oh, I really like that, or oh my gosh, look how beautiful that is. And at the end of the workshop, we have our group share, and it's amazing and fascinating to see what everyone captured. Even though we were all at the same location together, everyone walks away with something different because everyone sees the world differently. And that's what makes photography so exciting. It would be very boring if we all went out there and just shot, oh, yep, there's that one dune, we're all going to shoot it the same. So taking these surveys kind of helps, prevent that tunnel vision and really helps start opening up your mind to all the different potential opportunities. And yes, I still do this at every single spot. So here we go. So let's take a visual inventory. We're standing on our dune. We have this amazing storm blowing in that we can see here, but what do we want to photograph first? It may be this scene right here, and that's completely fine. It's amazing. We were with a workshop group this night, and they were just so excited to see this. Even though you've got wispies blowing off that dune in front of you, it was not a night of like oh my gosh, here we go out into the wind. It was actually a pretty gentle windstorm with just occasional gusts. But it was really pretty. We watched this whole storm in the back there kind of disintegrate and die. And dying storms are very pretty, especially in the desert. You get a lot of virga and just a lot of texture and mood. So that's fine. You want to take this photo, go for it. You're off to a great start. But let's dive a little more into this and see what else we might see. So break it down into the simple. You've got storm clouds and light. You've got some mountains back there. You've got some ridges. You've got light patches. You've got areas of shadow. It's kind of hard to see on the screen, but you've got vast areas of ripples, and these ripples are pretty cool. And you've got blowing sand. So right there, you've kind of broken this up, and you can see all these little stories emerging and things that you might want to focus on. So one thing too is to focus on the less literal. So instead of, saying exactly what it is, let's look at what else we have. So instead of storm clouds, well, I see we've got warm and cool contrast colors. We've got some blue and we've got some yellow. We've got lines instead of ridges. Instead of areas of light and shadow, we've got contrast. Maybe I'm thinking in black and white right now, like just looking at these two dunes, that would be a perfect black and white subject, especially with this little patch of light. We've got dark contrast down here. We've got textures and patterns, and we have movement. That's what the wind blowing the sand off the crest of the dune is representing. So when you take the less literal and you start looking at it from this point of view, now it's kind of easier to break down and work with. So let's take another example. These are the Mesquite Dunes. I think I was also with Sarah Marino for this photo. We have some sand dune peaks. We've got ridge lines. We've got overlapping dunes, kind of creating some visual interest. We have areas of highlights on the ridges. We have some atmosphere. And now let's look for the less literal. We've got triangles. We have lots of lines and layers. We have more triangles. We have contrast. There's that light and dark again. And now we've got contrast, not so much light and dark, but we've got contrasting colors. We have a very orange background here, and our dunes are blue. This was taken during a kind of a minimal windstorm, I would say. You've got a few wispies blowing here. But what you're looking at here is not actually the sky. This is an alluvial fan across the way. I've kept the sky out of this photo, but there was so much sand blowing in the atmosphere here, catching that light, that it was giving it that golden look. And these dunes, this was literally right after sunset. Like I said, still catching light in the atmosphere, but we have these pretty shadowed blue dunes here. So, orange and blue are a very cool, I'm not saying that literally, are a very nice color comparison to work with. It's one of my favorite things to find, and you can find it pretty frequently in nature. It's complementary. That's why your eyes appreciate it. So look for those things. So as far as compositional elements, dunes are pretty obvious. They're very simple structures. They all have their own leading lines. They naturally lead your eye into a scene. So look for these lines and curves out there next time you go. This is another wide angle scene. You've got this nice S curve leading up to this dune. You've got the wispies blowing in the direction of the wind, kind of adding some interest. Here's another example. So you can see the blue shadow and you can see which way the light was shining. So this was literally right after sun, or this was like that last kiss of light stage. This is the Ibex dunes. And these dunes here were facing west. These were in shadow. So you have that, again, warm, cool contrast to work with. And you've got these really nice curves and lines on these dunes. They were very clean. We were the only ones out there. And I did not walk through my composition, which was a pretty good feat. And then think of lines, make zigzag patterns. There are plenty of these out here. So this was way after twilight. This is about a 15-second exposure, almost in the dark. And I was getting that nice twilight glow after sunset. So very simple zigzags. Look for these geometric opportunities. You could also say we've got lots of triangles in here overlapping. And, lines and curves don't always just apply to the dunes themselves, but also look for it in your abstracts. You can always apply this compositional element when photographing abstracts. Like I said, this reminds me of looking at almost an aerial dune shot or a painting of dune layers. I don't know. I'm assuming it had to be something like a salt or like a borax kind of making these ridges stand up through the sand, but it was just absolutely fascinating. So yeah. Symmetry. Our eyes like symmetry. Symmetry represents harmony and stability and balance. So this is probably one of my favorite images I've ever taken on the dunes. This was just a simple little small scene that I stumbled upon while I was wandering around. This is that few minutes of that back rim lighting. So I'm facing sunset and these dunes are getting backlit. And you can see it just outlines these rims perfectly. And you can see I have symmetry in my compositions here. There's good balance. It just makes my eyes happy. So look for symmetry out there. Look for symmetry when you've got freestanding dunes too. You'll often see that their ridge lines often mimic each other because they're formed by the direction of the wind. So the wind was hitting, these two at the same time, kind of forming these nice ridges. They both have the sand blowing off. But take a look for that symmetry next time you're out. Layers, like I said about the atmospheric perspective, layers add depth to your scene and that perspective. So give your photos that depth, make your viewers think like, look at this massive dune field. Like that's pretty amazing. And again, this was photographed. This is actually one of the images that I'll be showing a post-processing demo on. But again, you've got your lines, your layers, you've got triangles in here. The possibilities are endless. So just look for these next time you're out wandering around, let your eyes find things. And another helpful point too is, we all walk around with these now in our pocket. And sometimes before I even get out my camera, I will literally stand there with my phone and look for compositions because this is almost like a wide angle lens here. So before getting your camera out and you don't get that tripod hole syndrome, as I talked about, where you plant your tripod and then you're there for a few hours, take out your smartphone, do some scans, see what looks nice. If you see something lining up, then get out your camera and start exploring from there. But I am not ashamed to say that my phone has helped me. I was out on a boat yesterday photographing dolphins. That's why I'm here in San Diego for my dolphin project. And I am ashamed to say I spent an hour photographing with my big camera, my professional camera. And at the end of the trip, I was just enjoying the dolphins and I actually got website worthy images from this phone. This is the 14. It's just getting crazy and it was raw too. So don't discount your phone and don't ever be afraid to play with it out in the field. No one's going to judge you because you have an iPhone image. If that's what your vision is leading you to, then please go for it. But it can be a helpful tool for composition finding before you get out your camera. And layers don't just have to be grand scenes of a sea of dunes for layers. You can also apply this to smaller telephoto scenes. One slide that I didn't put in here that I should have put in here is on focus stacking. You don't generally think about that when you're photographing these telephoto scenes, but since the scene is so compressed from the telephoto lens, you might have to be careful. And in a scene like this, I would just say, take a picture if you're at f10, f11, f8, whatever your sweet spot of your lens is. If you want to get a little bit more of that depth, then obviously increase your aperture to, 14, 16. Diffraction might start to set in around 18, 22. Just be mindful of that. Every lens has its sweet spot and its limitations. But generally, I like to shoot these anywhere between f8 and f11. That's just what seems to work on my Nikon lens. That is the sweet spot, so to speak. But one thing to be mindful of is just take a shot, go look on your LCD and just zoom in on your layer shots like this and just confirm everything's in focus. If it's not, you might have to focus stack. So for instance, in this photo, I might set a focus point actually here. I want to capture these ridges. I'd go up to this ridge. I'd go probably right here to catch these ridges or these patterns. I'd go here. I'd probably go here. And then if I want one for the back, I'd go here. And then I would combine those in Helicon focus. I like it better than Photoshop. It's easy to use. I can't encourage that enough, especially if you spend a lot of time doing macro or abstracts, but I always use Helicon. And, you know, it's your personal preference. I think as photographers, we get stuck in this hole that everything has to be tack sharp. I once had a participant show an image similar to this during the image share, and she was so down on herself because this background was slightly fuzzy because she just didn't set a focus point there, but she had all of this in focus and she was ready to throw the image away. And I just kept telling her, oh my gosh, no. And if you think about it, our own eyes are not sharp completely throughout the scene. And I hate to say it, I mean, I'm getting older, you know, now if I try to look at something up close, it's like, oh God, I can't see that. But, you know, our eyes aren't designed that way. And I think it's just us as photographers, we're such pixel peepers on our own stuff that, you know, if I asked, you know, Joe on the street, how do you feel about this image? He's not going to go there and go, oh my gosh, really, like you missed the focus back there. Like, no, that, you know, other people see our images for what they are. They're beautiful. It represents something. Don't get so focused on focus stacking, no pun intended. Just, you know, if you want your dunes all in focus, just make sure that you're doing those assurance checks, you know, just check and then focus stack if you have to. But that was just something that I should have put in here, especially doing these telephoto shots of layers, just something to be mindful of. And my little soapbox speech about don't pixel peep your own images. It's okay, really. Shapes. So triangles come to mind here most of the time for dunes, but, you know, compose using shapes. You know, I enjoyed the way that I had kind of almost two overlapping triangles here and then one big triangle coming out. This was also on a very windy day, so that's why the horizon is a little obscured because it was covered in sand. And shapes help you form these compositions. Triangles can represent strength, conflict, or tension, but also balance and harmony. Patterns. So sometimes compositions can feel challenging and they can be very easy to overthink. I'm a big overthinker. So when this arises, I often remind my students in the field that sometimes composition doesn't have to be complicated or have some, you know, Odyssey type story to follow. Sometimes keeping it simple is what it takes. And patterns and textures have these pleasing repetition, textures and patterns, and that can be your composition. So while I'm not suggesting that you plop your camera down on any pattern and just shoot because Jennifer Renwick told you so, just be mindful and make sure to, you know, kind of treat your patterns as little mini compositions. So while the pattern might be the composition, just make sure that it's pleasing, that it's well balanced, that you have a good selection of patterns and lines. Do your border patrol, make sure that there are no distractions, and overall just make sure it's balanced. But they're fairly easy to photograph, and don't get lost in, well, this sand ripple is heading out this way and I can't change it. Just, you know, if it works and you're happy with it, shoot it. You know, you can always, you know, work a little magic in post-processing if something isn't quite as you expect. And I'll be post-processing an abstract image and kind of showing you what I do and all the possibilities for it. But don't get stuck on one thing. You know, sometimes the composition is just about the light. It's about what's going on, you know. It doesn't always have to be, well, my two lines don't intersect here. Don't get lost in that, because, you know, we want you to be having a good time photographing out there. Be mindful of your compositions, you know, learn the rules, but you don't have to follow them. They're just good fundamentals. That's kind of how I approach my own photography. Maybe I'm kind of a rebel, but it's what I teach my students too. Just don't overthink it. Light can guide your composition as well and actually help strengthen the lines that you may already be photographing. So here I've got that rim lighting, that backlight from sunrise on the dunes. I've combined it with a telephoto shot of layers, and it just really makes that scene pop and, you know, creates a very pleasing and intriguing scene. Sometimes light can be the leading line in your composition. For instance, here, I was standing right in front of this dune, and I enjoyed the ripple pattern kind of aproning out, like an apron. And, the light was my composition. I just liked that comma shaped. And so I let it be. Work with dappled light. So in the desert, when we do get our kind of sunny, cloudy days, it's a great opportunity to work with what I call dappled light, and what it's, referred to. I make everything plural and cute, so I say dapplies. But anyway, so look for these opportunities, especially on the dunes. So this is photographed from that one higher perspective with a longer telephoto lens. And this was a day that we had light shifting constantly across the dune field. And I happened to catch it at one point where it was going right across my scene, and I had shadows on top and bottom. And it just added to the layers that are already in this composition. But to me, that was the main compositional element in this scene, was the dappled light. Look for differences in texture. Like I said, you've got all sorts of abstracts around the dunes. Don't discount looking down at the ground. I just really enjoyed how these ripples and lines in the sand were really clean, and how they butted up and juxtaposed against these kind of more weathered mud ripples. So in the areas, especially in Mesquite, after a rain, you will get puddles that stand for a bit and kind of create muddy spots, and then they crack in the sun as they dry. So, you can usually find them at the base of all the smaller dunes in the field after a rain. So go out there and look for those. But, just look for these little tiny abstract scenes and use other elements to help. Speaking of other elements, use vegetation. I know that we get kind of tunnel vision looking for super clean dunes, and some of us like vegetation, some don't. I like having it in some of my compositions. I just feel like it adds to the sense of place. There is life out on these barren dunes, despite what some people think. And with vegetation, I really enjoy working with the light. So I wait for kind of like the last light to hit areas of vegetation. So this is a shadow from a dune that's literally like right over here. And I just happen to catch the last light on these little tiny bushes. Over here, I know some people would say it's a distraction, clone it out, but for some reason, I just like it. It balances the scene a little bit over there. And it tells the story that, yes, there is vegetation among the dunes. So black and white opportunities. Harsh contrasts, like I've said, provide a great base for processing in black and white. So black and white is already a departure from reality in my eyes. And while certain light may not first appear like a great opportunity, you can still definitely process it in black and white. If you have trouble seeing black and white scenes, most cameras these days will allow you to change your picture settings to set your LCD to black and white. Then you can see in black and white through your camera. And if you just take it out and start using it on these days, you'll start to recognize those tones and contrasts that make for a good black and white image. It takes a while to develop your eye to that, but once you do, you start seeing a lot of black and white scenes everywhere, and you start to appreciate it. So here's an example of, not discounting other types of light for black and white. The image on the left is the raw image. So this is what it looked like. We were out with a workshop group shooting this dust storm kind of moving over the dunes. It was completely gray and cloudy. The clouds were pretty moody. And, I was encouraging them to, go ahead and take a shot. We'll go over post-processing. Like, this could be a really amazing scene with the atmosphere and everything. And, you kind of get the side eye occasionally, like, you're really okay. Well, Jennifer says to shoot it. And they did. And we brought it into post. And the image on the right is literally just like an 8-step process, very quick sliders in Lightroom to really bring out the depth, the drama, and the dramatic moodiness of this image. And while it's hard to see in the raw file, if you look kind of right here, that was an area of dappled light, just barely making it through the clouds. I wanted to keep my exposure, pretty in the middle a little bit, so I didn't expose for that patch of light, but I knew it was there and I brought it out in post. And anytime you have this blowing atmosphere against the mountains and these moody skies, you can just do so many amazing things in post-processing. I will be showing a black and white example of this too. But yeah, don't discount that flatter light and think, oh, there's no way I can do black and white with this. So some other ideas for working with dunes. So I didn't want to dive too much into this because I could really talk for hours on this and expressive photography. But dunes are very expressive to me. That's one of the things that I mentioned in the first part of this presentation and why I like photographing them. And I love using metaphors and you know what I'm trying to say. My throat is getting raw and I can't speak. So I'm a big component of that. I love doing it. I know it's not every photographer's cup of tea, but it helps me connect the landscapes that I shoot. And in turn, it takes the viewer into familiar territory with me, you know, using a metaphor on something or making the tree have feelings, and it kind of brings them into the image too. So here are some ideas to work with. Use emotions when photographing the dunes. Many of us are uncomfortable with sharing our emotions with others, especially with words, but you can say so much with a photograph without speaking a word. And I don't mean to be cliche here with a photo is worth 1,000 words. Yes, it is. But sometimes when we don't even realize it, our emotional state at the time of photographing comes through in our photos. Our choices when we frame images, to the subject that we're capturing, to the post-processing choices that we make, all form in our subconscious and then through when we click that shutter. So one of the most powerful lessons I've learned in the 7 years of doing this is that if you connect with the subjects that you're shooting and you put emotion behind your image, the viewer will see that and connect with the image themselves. You know, most of you probably do know me for my wild dolphin project. That's one of the most emotional things that I've ever put out. It was a collection of images that I photographed here in Southern California after the death of my mother. I processed them in black and white. They have a very unique look to them, but it was my way of helping myself through the grieving process. And I poured a lot of my emotions into those. And to this day, those are still the photos that I get a lot of emails about saying, you know, I connected with this. This reminded me of getting through grief from, you know, my grandmother or my mother or whatever. But people connect when they see that you connected with that subject on an emotional level or personal level, they'll connect more easily too. That elevates a photo from beyond the snapshot. And dunes are perfect examples to work with in this case. And they have a lot of different subjects and kind of angles that you can take. For this instance, this is Promise of a New Day. This was one of my first experiences in Death Valley photographing dunes. This is actually out at the Eureka Dunes, a very tall dune. I'm standing below it. This dune is probably about 50, 60 feet high. I'm using a telephoto and the sun was setting. And on this particular day, I had gotten a call. This is when I was visiting out from, still living in Illinois, but, you know, going out with, I had met David, long story. But I had met him and we were kind of adventuring together once a month. And I had never been here before. And this was just amazing. But I had left my mom back at home and she was going through a particularly tough time with her terminal illness. And I had gotten like 1,000 phone calls that day of just, you know, she was back in the hospital, the assisted living place had to take her. She was going through all this. I couldn't be there. It was just exceptionally stressful. And I can remember just being out in the dunes and thinking, you know, I'm going to have to head home tomorrow. I can't be here anymore. How am I going to get through this? How am I going to get my own mother through this? You know, I'm so tired of seeing her pain and suffering. And I just happened to see the sun setting behind this dune. And even through the tears, I took this image. I purposely created the sun star. I just went down to like F18. I think this might have been F22. I'm not sure. But the colors were very soothing to me. You know, we've got a lot of purple and blue in this image. And seeing the sunset just kind of brought me back to center, realizing, you know what, tomorrow's a new day. Things are going to get a little better, you know, give yourself a break. And I took this scene. And even to this day, I can still bring myself to this scene when I'm having a stressful day, look at it and just sigh and go, it's just a day. Tomorrow is a new day, a fresh new start. Things will get better. So that's a good example of when I put my emotions into that. This image that I just showed you guys a few minutes ago, I caught this season. David and I had a particularly rough time this season getting to Death Valley. Poor David had a kidney stone. We had to go through all this surgery in Denver before we could leave in Death Valley. We had to cancel a few workshops. It was just a really stressful time for us. And so by the time we got to Death Valley, I was still dealing with kind of the emotional bandwidth of that. And, you know, it was super stormy in Death Valley this year. We had windstorms constantly. And, you know, they kind of, you know, windstorms, you know, kind of, you know, represent a few things. They resurface things, kind of like when we want to change who we are in our lives, we kind of resurface and polish ourselves. They can be very moody, very dramatic, very damaging, you know, very destructive. So I was kind of feeling more on that end. I was very moody. I was being, I felt very dramatic. And I saw this scene and I named it tempestuous just because I thought, this is kind of how I'm feeling right now. It's been a really rough start to the year. I'm just feeling very unsettled, just like this windstorm. And I watched this windstorm blow across the dunes. And I just thought, this is kind of what I'm feeling right now. And if I process this in black and white, that adds to my depth and mood. So yeah, I definitely put myself into this title and this image. So, sometimes the landscape matches what you're feeling. Sometimes we put our own emotions into the landscape. So think about that next time, and especially use black and white if you do want to bring out that drama and moodiness. Here's another example. So I anthropomorphize this little bush. This is on the Mesquite Dunes during a pretty wicked windstorm. And I use these metaphors and, I made this tree have feelings. So at first glance, I just thought, oh my gosh, this tree is getting battered in the wind. He's kind of taking shelter in between these two dunes. Like, goodness, how long has he been out here? How many years, how many windstorms has he seen? And I named this sheltered because I felt like the tree was taking shelter. I find that it makes the feelings and emotional impacts of the image more relatable to the viewer if I do these things. So I absolutely give my subjects feelings, even if they're inanimate. In that case, I know a bush is alive, but you know what I'm saying. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Use simple metaphors. You guys have seen this image already. I went out there and I said, this looks like wood grain from when I used to help my dad in his wood shop when he used to make furniture as I was growing up. And I can still almost smell the wood shavings in the garage just looking at this. So right there, I've connected to this. I've brought up a memory from the past. And that's how I came to this image. So it doesn't have to be complicated. If you find dried mud that looks like frosted brownies, then go for it. It just shows that you connected with the image, and the viewer will also connect with that as well. So just a really quick, I could talk about this for hours. I'm a very emotional person, but just keep these things in mind. Utilize these in the field, try something different. If you're not used to putting your own emotions into your photography, just give it a try. No one's going to laugh at you. No one's going to judge you. You do photography for yourself first and not for everyone else. I think that's also one of the most important lessons I've taken away from this field. So I'm going to go over some compositional examples now. So some photos that I have and kind of what I was thinking and why I did what I did. And then I'll go into post-processing. So first example, this is called Winding Light. So this is the Eureka Dunes in Death Valley during a windstorm. I know you guys are seeing a theme here with my windstorm love. But again, the sun was setting, you've got a nice glow in the sky. And there were a few things that I really liked about this image. So the first compositional case study that we'll look at here, I really liked the leading lines. That's pretty obvious. You've got these lines flowing through here. You've got wispies over here. Your eye continually kind of stays in the frame because it takes you up to these dunes here. We've got some curves and everything guides our eye into the scene. So here's that leading line. We've also got some ripples coming off the edge of this dune. And then we've got these leading lines kind of pushing up into the ridge. So the balance of this kind of keeps our eyes happy and it keeps us in the middle of the scene. Another example, this is that gathered one. This is that divot from the rain. Very simple composition here, and this is a smaller scene. There's definitely a visual flow with a spiral here. The lines kind of lead you there, and you've got this kind of comma shaped. Most of the lines lead your eye into the middle here. You've got some ripples, and the contrast here also kind of caught my eye. I really like that I've got some smooth contrast here and ripples around it. So all kind of guiding ideas. Here's a kind of, this is more of a mid-range scene. And again, another windstorm, actually kind of on a cloudy day. So you can kind of see, so here's an example. I don't have that strong backlight, but I was still able to create an image even with some clouds and some wind. You just get those more subtle colors and kind of tones. So right off the bat, we've got a nice curving line into the dunes. There's symmetry and balance. You've got this dune peak, you've got this dune peak in the back, you've got balance on each side here with this little dune and that little dune. And there's definitely a directional flow. I forgot to mark on that one. But my mouse, I kind of walked you guys through that. And then here we go. What is the composition here? The composition is patterns. At first glance, I looked at this and thought, this reminds me of the ocean. These are waves. So I just made sure to kind of do border patrol. Looking back at this, I don't know if it was just bringing the photo in here or not, but I would have definitely given that more breathing room. But everything else is pretty repetitive and clean. Nothing else really sticking out. So here it's just about a simple pattern and repetition. And then the last one that I'll go through here, this is probably one of my favorite black and white images I've ever created on the dunes. So here we've got shapes, we've got triangles, we've got lots of layers, we've got tonal contrast, we have symmetry and balance, and we've got that atmospheric perspective. So this was done at high noon one day on the dunes, like, very harsh light to give me that backlight. And here we go. We've got triangles everywhere. We've got the main dune. We've got these side dunes. We've got little triangles here. We even have triangles in our mountains back here. Then we've got layer lines. We've got the obvious layer lines here in the dunes, but we also have a line back here in our mountains, but also the line that's kind of coming out of this blowing atmospheric sand here. And then last but not least, we have a lot of symmetry, and not only symmetry, but we have opposites. So this was actually in shadow. This was in light. I'll say that this was like a dappled light cloudy day, which is why I've got these brighter areas here and darker areas. So, keep these things in mind when you're out in the field. And hopefully I've given you just a few little ideas today. I mean, this is such a vast subject. And there's so many little facets of it that I could talk for hours on each, but hopefully now this gives you just a few more ideas to work out with or to walk out to the dunes with, so you're not so caught in the chaos of the scene and, kind of panicking, which we've all done, including me. Oh, and apparently I was just talking about the atmospheric contrast, adding depth and dimension. So with that, before I dive into my post-processing, which won't take, it'll probably take the last like 15 minutes here. I'm not a very technical person, so my post-processing is very simple. Are there any questions that I can answer before I go into that?
Yeah, we definitely, well, first and foremost, the amount, the sheer volume of this information is just astounding, Jennifer. It's the reason I wanted you to come speak to the group is exactly for this the exact time of bringing forth of the passion and also just the comprehensiveness. And there's a lot of information in here that's a lot of people will need to go back to it as they continue to refresh and go forward, which is good because we want it to be really comprehensive for people that are going out, and other people will continue to take you and David's workshops, or the ones there to guide through the process, which is absolutely great. I got stumped on Virga. What is Virga? You said, this had Virga. Yes. I was like, what? What is that? So
yes. So Virga, we see it a lot in Colorado. You actually see it a lot in the deserts in the winter. It's essentially the kind of like little wispy cloud rain shafts that you see kind of coming halfway down to the ground. It's essentially precipitation that doesn't make it to the ground. It kind of evaporates. Okay. So it just makes these really cool, especially black and white photos. It looks really cool. It's like the cloud is kind of raining, but it's kind of a cloud, not really full rain. But yeah, just super crazy conditions. You see it when storms break up, and you see it especially if you have grapple or like kind of sleet, especially in the winter. But yeah.
You and David with all your weather terms. So
oh my gosh, I know. Yeah. I'm not even half the weather nerd he is. So
Barbara said she had to Google it too. So so we definitely, I was able to answer a couple questions for people just related to specific things I had. But there's some questions about exposure time. So one question about your exposure during twilight, another question from Brian about full moon dune photography and the exposure to that.
And because I have so much to go over, like I had actually a few slides with stars and moon photography out in the dunes, and I just can't, I completely forgot to put it in, but I also knew I had a time frame to keep. And like I said, it's always so hard for me to stay within because I always like to present so much information. So as far as the shutter or the exposure time at twilight, when I go out in the mornings, if you're going out for that sunrise twilight, you're going to start out probably, depending on what your preferences are, and kind of what your goal with your photo is that morning. But generally, the darker it is, I'll start off at like 20 seconds. And even though the sun is not up yet, the day is starting, you're getting more light, and you're going to find that all of a sudden that 20 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes later, now you're at 18 or 15 seconds. And it just it shortens the closer you get to sunrise. So after sunset, it's just the opposite. So, you're clicking, but then as it gets darker, you're venturing more into, okay, the exposure that I took 3 minutes ago, was 5 minutes, and now we're kind of venturing towards 7 and 8 minutes. And you can, of course, raise your ISO if you don't want to, a longer shutter. Maybe it is a little breezy, you can't take that long. But to really appreciate that twilight light, you are venturing into like the 10-second, 15-second range. I know some of my mud abstracts from Death Valley, same timing, same twilight. I've even gone 30 seconds on. So it's really what, how your camera sensor reads the light, what your preferences are. Are you going for a much whiter kind of pastel look? Are you kind of going for that twilight where you can still identify shadows and highlights? It just really depends on what you're after. But just off the top of my head, those are the ranges that you can probably expect at those different times.
Yeah, great. A couple good questions kind of just rolled in as well. What white balance? We all know shooting raw, you can change your white balance, but what white balance are you using to pre-visualize within the dunes? And then also another question about picture profiles. Do you any specific picture profile settings related to the dunes or landscape?
Yeah, I don't really have any picture profile settings. Occasionally, if I go into Lightroom, which we'll do here in just a few minutes, occasionally I'll change it from Adobe. What is it? I should know. It's like standard, and then you've got like landscape. The landscape is definitely a little more vivid, and depending on the colors that I'm working with in my dunes, I might do that. But as far as in-camera profiles, I'm not doing anything. I'm usually always shooting on auto balance or auto white. The sun actually setting, the daylight, I guess it is. And I find that does a pretty spot on job. Occasionally, if I'm working in it's not a dune example, but like canyons, I might actually put my camera on shade or cloudy, because that kind of increases those warm tones. And sometimes in the field, I just kind of want to see what would this look like in in Lightroom when I get it there. And I know I can change it, but sometimes I'll help myself see that. The only time I can think is there was this really crazy twilight light once, and I actually did fluorescent, which sounds really crazy, but it worked. It just helped me identify those colors and kind of helped me adjust my settings for my pre-visualization to what I wanted to process my photo for. But for the most part, I'm usually out there on the daylight setting, and that's worked completely fine for me. But occasionally, if I get curious, if I have a warmer scene, I will try cloudy or shade, just to see, again, part of that pre-visualization post-processing process.
That's great. 2 questions came in from 2 different people at the same time. They're not, I don't think they're collaborating, but because they're slightly different. But yeah. Do you use ND or polarizer filters when you're out photographing?
For the dunes, no. The only time I've used ND out there is if I'm doing longer exposures for the sky. But other than that, no polarizer on the dunes, and usually not an ND. And I just remember that guy was asking about moonlight. Yes, so I have done moonlight on the dunes. And again, it's personal preference. If you want that really bright scene with a moon, even just like a 30-40% moon or a 20% moon can cast quite a bit of light, and that sand is reflective. So you just kind of have to watch that. We also light paint, and we'll bring out light panels in the dunes to light up dunes if we're doing Milky Way. But yeah, it can be kind of an otherworldly experience out there to photograph like under a full moon on the dunes.
That's fun. Okay, well, I know we'll probably go a few minutes over, but I don't want to take too much of your time. Beyond that, so the one question was about post-processing. Cloudy days, aren't many shadows or much color. So I think as you go through that, it'll be a good demonstration. And then I think the other ones I can answer those as we go, but let's have you jump over in your post-processing.
Yeah. Okay, let me stop sharing the screen. I'm working on 2 monitors, so let me get onto my regular monitor. Okay, let me stop this, end the show, get out of here, get out of my email, go into Lightroom. Okay, can you see my Lightroom?
We can.
Okay, perfect. All right. So the first thing I'm going to say before I dive into this is I am not a technical person as far as post-processing. I know what I know. I'm pretty set in my ways, kind of like a grouchy old lady. And I really don't do a lot in Photoshop. I find, especially as the years go on, Lightroom is advancing so quickly. They've offered so many new exciting things like the masking tools. They're getting pretty close to Lightroom, which is kind of fun to think about, or to Photoshop, which is kind of fun to think about. But right now, I mean, I'm still just heavily in Lightroom. I do like 5 or 6 different things, and Photoshop is saved for dust spot removal, cloning, and occasionally working with some mid-tone contrast with the TK panel, which I will not be diving into for this. I'm just going to keep it pretty simple. And the whole basis of my processing is keep it simple. You know, I'd rather be out shooting and try to get things as close as I can in field to what I'm shooting than worry about, oh, I'm going to do like an hour's worth of work. To the people that can do that stuff, I'm super envious and amazed. But for me, I just keep it as simple as I can just because I'm not technical. So this first image here, we'll start with this. This is that, I don't remember if I had a title for this one. It might be Dusty Dunes. So this was taken during a pretty intense windstorm. You can see we have a lot going on here. And at first glance, this was actually, before I say that, this was a pre-visualization of that. I want this to be a black and white because right off the bat, it's pretty flat. I don't really like the color of my dunes. They kind of look kind of washed out, you know, not very exciting. There's not a whole lot of contrast here, but I really like the atmosphere going on. And you can see here, I kind of blew out a little bit, almost blew out on my highlights, just not quite, but almost there. But I didn't let that bother me because I knew if I'm doing a black and white with this, you can actually stretch your whites and your blacks a little further than you can with color without really kind of freaking out. So that didn't bother me. But what my main story was here, you can see I've got my nice curve, you've got the sand blowing off, and you've got a little bit of the atmospheric perspective back here. And while it's hard to see and appreciate, you do have some blowing sand. So that was my goal for this. I want to bring it to a black and white state. I don't care for the color, so let's go monochrome. So let me just get myself out of the way here. So one of the first things, got my develop module, one of the first things that I like to do is I like to look at my histogram. So one of the first things I notice right off the bat here is that I don't have a lot of room on the right side of my histogram to bring things up. I do not like using my contrast slider. I just find it takes things garish really quickly if you're not careful. I instead like to focus on my midtones. So I like to bring my white slider up. And to do that, I need room on my right and the right side of my histogram. So here I don't have a lot. So that's okay, because I'm going to show you what I do. So first things first, I like to go and just automatically we'll go right into Adobe Monochrome, and that gets me pretty close. And it's a good starting base, but it's still a bit flat. I don't have that black and white contrast that I'd like to see. So first things first, I'm going to bring my exposure down a bit. So I'm just going to take my slider, I'm going to bring it down to about right there. And one thing I'd like to start off by saying is that I shoot Nikon. And one of the good things about Nikon is that my shadows, I can usually bring up shadows a lot without losing detail or introducing noise. I know every camera kind of has their thing, but that's one of the things I really like most about my Nikon. I won't be pulling up my shadows here, but I just wanted to mention it because in my last image that I have, it's very underexposed, and that's why I know I can get away with it. So I'm going to create room. I brought my exposure down a little bit. Now I have some room to work on the right side here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is do a mask. I'm going to use a linear gradient because I want to go ahead and I want to bring up the contrast in these dunes. I don't want to bring it up in the sky because I'm getting pretty close, like I said, to clipping, and I don't want to lose any more detail. So I'm going to start with a linear gradient. And I'm just going to do the gradient. Nowadays, you can do the select sky. I did try on this one. Let me go back. And their masking is getting pretty close. But in this case, it just didn't work. It kind of fell on its face over here on the right side just because there's not a lot of details, so it didn't know what to do. So I'm not going to do that. So instead, I'm just going to do a gradient. Pardon me here in my clumsiness as I go through here. All right, linear gradient. Here we go. And now let me get rid of that. I don't want that. Just kidding. Okay. Linear gradient. Here we go. So I'm going to start about here. And I'm going to kind of angle it to my dunes. I'm not really concerned about the contrast up here. I don't want it spilling over. I'm mainly concerned about this. So I'm going to do that first. And I'm going to pull my whites up all the way. And this might scare some people, but I can get away with it. It's not introducing noise, but it didn't get me quite to where I know I could go, because I know that these little wispies were pretty darn bright to my eye. So I am going to bring my exposure up a bit, and you can see maybe about there. And I'll play with this, like maybe I like it right there, just so it's not putting this so much in shadow. And I can even bring my feathering down just a hair there. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to call that good. And now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to bring down my blacks, because I'd like to get a little bit more contrast here. I'm watching that I am clipping a little bit there, so I might go off a bit, but I'm really not as concerned about it. If I ever print this image, that's something that you're going to want to be, advised about. If you are clipping your whites, there's going to be no ink laid down in that spot. And obviously, if you're clipping your blacks, there's obviously just black ink and no details. So be mindful of that. So this is getting pretty close. You can see there's a gradient in the sky here, which is accurate. I mean, the sun was literally right here, not over here. And it was kind of hazy and atmospheric, and it's casting the light here. So my shadows all make sense. I enjoy where they are. So I'm going to kind of call that good. And then I'm going to, now that I'm out of my filter, I am going to, well, no, I'm not, because my whites are starting to clip. One thing I am going to do, though, is I want to bring my clarity up a bit. Now, the clarity slider can get dangerous very quickly if you're not careful. So can dehaze. I know it'd be tempting in this instant to kind of do dehaze over here, but it's going to introduce artifacts really quickly. So yeah, well, it brings out the mountains a little bit. It just adds a lot of contrast that I don't want. So I'm just going to back off it. I can see my mountains here. I can see my sand. And really what I wanted to emphasize was this ridge. So I am going to bring my clarity up a bit. So clarity is kind of like your midtones almost a little bit. And that's probably why I enjoy it in this situation. Because if I was going to take this into Photoshop, I might screw around with my midtones a bit, but just for a quick and easy, this got me kind of to a really good black and white point pretty quickly. And I'm pretty happy with this. It's dramatic. My light makes sense. It's coming in across the scene. I've highlighted the little wispies, and pretty much from this point on, I would look at my detail. I'm going to look at my sharpening. I also, black and white photos, I like to bring my sharpening up, and I do like to make sure I'm not adding noise, and I am getting a little noisy there, but so I'm going to back off of it a little bit. But one thing about black and white images is you almost want a little bit of noise. That's what's known as accutense. And you'll notice a lot of like black and white fine art photography printers, they actually, you want a little bit of grain. That's kind of what makes a black and white a little bit. So don't be too afraid of grain. Kind of like how we're obsessed with everything being sharp. I think we've also gotten obsessed with noise. And in some cases, it actually, it's not horrible. And kind of that's how I feel about black and white photos. I'm really not going to bring my luminance up. I'm pretty happy with where it is now. So then I would just take this up into Photoshop. I need to update Photoshop, but that's okay. And this is where I go to remove all my dust spots. And at quick first glance, just because of this, I can see that I have one there. You can see how much I like cloning. It comes up automatically on this tool pretty much all the time because I'm in here a lot doing this. I'm going to take care of that little dude. I've got just one little hot spot here I'm going to take care of, and this is kind of distracting. If I had more time, I might go into here and eliminate some of these really specular highlights here. They don't drive me completely crazy, but I might want to take a few out that might be drawing my eye places or that kind of look like eyeballs staring at me. So I might spend some time doing that. But overall, really quickly with just a few simple slider adjustments, and that's kind of how I do. I like bringing my whites up for that kind of contrast instead of using my contrast slider. So this is just a quick and easy example. So that's one. And then from here, I would save my image back to Lightroom. Another helpful tip is once you bring this back to Lightroom, have this be your final product. Otherwise, you're going to get into the weeds and make all sorts of copies of this image and drive yourself crazy if you bring it back into Lightroom and I just want to adjust my highlights a little bit. And then you've created just a giant mess. I learned the lesson the hard way a few years ago. I will not bore you with that story. So from here, I would actually call this good. To me, this is a really, I like this black and white. This is kind of what I pre-visualized in the field, and that's where I brought it. So going back to Lightroom, my next example. So this is, as you can see, this is right as the sun was setting. I've got, my nice rim light here, my histogram. I do actually, I'm still, I don't have much room on the right side here to bring out my whites. So I'm going to evaluate that first. But just to set the scene, the sun was right here. The mountain line is right here. I've got a really nice glow here, kind of setting the scene. I've got tiny, tiny people climbing on the dunes over here. They look cool, but I don't like people in my photos, so they will be coming out. And my main goal with this photo is to really accentuate the room or the rim light and just kind of make this a little more dramatic. I didn't clip, but it's a little bright. But to my eyes, I could actually see the shadows in all these dunes. I have notes. This is literally the first time I've done post-processing live, so bear with me. I'm no David, my partner, so he's like awesome at this. So let's go ahead and dive into what I would do with this one. So first of all, always look at your histogram. I have room on the right. I can go ahead and bring my whites up to help my contrast. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. Or I'm going to bring my exposure down to give myself more room. I'm sorry. My brain's starting to go flat. So I'm going to bring it down almost a whole step. There I have a lot of room to work with. And it looks moody. And it looks, like, oh, Jennifer, you lost some detail. But here we go. I'm going to slide my white up a little bit. And one thing that you can see is happening here is all of a sudden my colors changed a bit. So, adding or increasing the white slider, I am increasing the contrast. Anytime you increase contrast, you add saturation. So I'm just going to dial that back down to what my eye saw, and it was pretty blue. So I'm going to go about right there. And you can start to see I've got blue shadows coming up here. So now I'm getting that nice balance between blue and the gold light here. Again, one of my favorite things to work with. And I've brought it back down to a pleasing color. So now that I've done that, I can actually fiddle with my whites even a little more. So I'm going to bring it up just a hair more. And I'm going to do the, oh, my cat's screaming. I'm so sorry. Maui. It's dinner time. So next I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back to my linear gradient filter because I see a few things I would like to do. So I'm going to, again, I'm going to kind of start here with my filter and bring this up. And I'm going to feather it out where I am losing kind of the detail in these back dunes because I don't want to make it contrasty. I might actually bring this down a little bit too. So again, keeping that atmospheric perspective in mind, I don't want to make all of this dark because that's not what it was. The light is creating, this perspective and I want to keep that, but I'd like to bring this down a bit. So I'm going to do another grad filter here. I'm going to come over and I'm going to bring my whites up a bit and I'm going to bring my blacks down until I get, you can see I still have some blue in my shadows. And I'm going to go to clarity. So these ridge lines, and I'm just going to bring it up a touch. Now you can see what happened here. All of a sudden now we've got much more definition on these ridge colors. And I'm just looking, I still have some blue in my shadow there. I might back off it a little bit. I might just do that. So there I'm kind of close and I'm going to, again, cool it down just a little bit. Nope. Just a little bit. And you all know, I'm sure, that if you want to make more refined adjustments, you can use your arrow key and get there faster than I'm scrolling, but just for time's sake. And now I'm going to go back up. I'm happy with that, but I'm going to do the same thing with the sky because I'm not, I got really white here doing that general adjustment and I want to be a little bit more local. So I'm going to take a grad. And same thing, I'm going to actually start like here. And I might move this up a bit. Let's keep our dunes out of it, shall we? So I want to keep that warmth light where it was hitting. And I'm going to bring my contrast down just a hair, just a hair. And I think I'm going to, well, it's a warm scene. I'm going to do this. And I always like adding a little bit of magenta into my landscape images, just to give it a little pop there. And I might bring my blacks down just a little bit. So you get this glow, kind of half sphere glow here, but it's not glowy over here because the sun was right here and you can kind of see just that circle of light. And this is all personal preference. I mean, it's kind of what you saw. I'm just going to bring it down just a hair there. And now you can actually see that there's actually, that might just be my computer screen, but I still have these people here, but I'm pretty happy with this because I was standing in front of these dunes here. These were darker to my eyes, and then these were shallower dunes. So they're in the light more. And I'm pretty happy with this. So now I would take this into Photoshop, and just to save us time, I'm not going to do that, but I would just go into Photoshop and I would just clone out all these people. Sorry, folks. And I would probably, actually, no, you know what? I was going to take it into Photoshop to show you guys Orton. So we are going to go into Photoshop. But really the main takeaway from these images, especially the dunes, is just giving yourself right on the histogram or space on the right side of your histogram, bringing that down and using white instead of contrast to help increase your contrast. I really enjoy using that, and I haven't touched my contrast slider in years. Okay, so in here, so I lied. I am going to go to the TK panel. There are other ways of adding Orton. So the Orton effect is adding like a nice glow to your image. I already have some here, but just to show you guys how to use this, I'm going to add some here. Sean Bagshaw does amazing videos on the TK panel. I will let him teach you guys, but just for time's sake, I'm going to go add a little Orton. So you can see it makes everything glowy. And the key to this is that you want to bring your radius up. They say to the megapixels of your camera. I can tell you my megapixels are 45. I'm not totally thrilled with bringing it up that high. I used to shoot a 500, D500, a crop sensor camera, and it was 20 megapixels, I believe. So I'm just used to being around 20. And I have found that I just kind of like to stay around 20. You'll have to play with it depending on what your camera does. So I'm going to go there. So that applies Orton everywhere. But this is one of the beauty things of the TK panel. I can make adjusted masks to put my Orton where I think I want it to go. So I'm just going to click up here. These are essentially like your zone. This is like your zone system here. You've got your lights over here. You've got your darks over here. But I'm going to target my lights. So I'm going to do a lights 2. So anything in black, it's not going to affect. Anything in white and the grayer tones, you might see a little bit. So I'm going to apply it there. So I'm just going to apply it, and it applies it for me. So you can see things got a little glowy out here. There's just a little more pop in my ridges, and you still have control. So if I don't want the full-on Orton effect here, we're not in the land of Cinderella. I don't want it to be that glowy. I'm going to bring this down just a bit, and I'm going to stop it probably about right at about 60% or so. And that's where I like it. So Orton is great if you want to add glow. Some people go overboard with it, but it's their art. I'm not going to say anything about that. It's whatever makes you happy. But I find Orton is just great to kind of give you that pop, almost that warmth, kind of like you were sitting there staring into the sun. Fog naturally adds Orton. Atmosphere can add Orton naturally. So just be aware of that before you start going and adding Orton to your fog images. But for dunes, in this kind of case where I've kept kind of the sun out, but I still want this glowiness on my dunes, I like to add a little bit. So now for my last one, I'm going to go to this abstract image. And this is where I get a little weird with my stuff, but it's okay. We all have our thing. So abstract images are the only thing that I will play with in post-processing as far as, turning things, flipping things, warping corners, because I know that I had the full capacity to walk around my image, and I didn't. But sometimes just flipping an abstract a certain way can completely change the feeling of it. And with these dune images, especially with these dune textures, things happen that just create these optical illusions, and they're really cool to work with. So first off, let me look at my histogram. What do I want to do? So in my mind, I can see that, this was taken during a morning twilight. Things are very blue. I know I can bring that blue out. I want to make these lines pop. And I want to kind of play with this pattern here. You can see I've got some things to clean up. Sand is not always completely clean. You're going to find sticks, twigs, bushes, all sorts of things, insects. And I'm not sure I'm happy with this. And I don't want to, cause a fight in the comments or the chat, but I crop things. I'm not afraid to crop. Especially I have the megapixels now to do it, so it just doesn't bother me. I'm fine if this never gets onto a billboard. sometimes you see things in post-processing that you didn't necessarily notice in the field. So maybe I should have just zoomed in more on this part that I'm kind of looking at here. But you know what? It's always 2020. So I am going to crop this, but that'll be my last step here. So looking at my histogram to actually bring up the blues and make this kind of pop with the pattern and texture, I have lots of room to work with here. So I underexposed this quite a bit in the field. I'm not clipping, but it's pretty underexposed. And this is what I'm talking about. I know I can get away with this with my Nikon. If I have to push up my shadows, I can do it without really causing a lot of noise. But I'm fine with it. So I underexposed. So now I'm going to fix that. So I'm going to bring my whites up a bit. And actually those brightened up a little quickly. So I'm actually going to underexpose it just a little more and keep bringing my whites up. And remember, like I said, when you bring your whites up, you're increasing a contrast so you can increase your saturation. So I'm going to dial it back a little bit. I'm going to go somewhere like right there. And that's pretty, I like that. I feel like I've got a little magenta in my white areas, which it was probably like that. That's where the sun was highlighting those, not the sun, but the pre-twilight warm light was hitting those ridges, and that's fine. But I'm just going to bring it down just a hair. So I really like that. So now I'm going to go down here to my tone curve. A lot of people don't use their tone curves. I'm just starting to use it more and more, and I'm just going to play with it. The number one thing I can give you advice about with working in Lightroom is you just got to play with it. Bring your photos in, play with all these sliders, see what they do, see what you like. You can watch videos till your heart's content, but it's all about what you want to do with your images. So by doing that, it got a little too blue. So I'm just going to dial back my blue a little bit. And actually, I do like this a bit. I might bring my whites down just a tad. There we go. I like what my tone curve does. The tone curve is working with those mid-tones. And the sliders at the top here in your basic panel are working globally on the whole thing. But this focuses more on your midtones. So don't be afraid to come down here and play with this curve. You can find that you can do things and stretch things a little more than you can in the basic panel. So I'm pretty happy with this. I really like the look. We went from kind of flat and drab to this in just literally like 2 sliders. So now I'm going to crop this image. So I'm going to go down a little bit. I'm going to kind of do border patrol, kind of see where I am. And I'm really fascinated with this part of my scene. And as you're looking at this now, the ripples are concave. So if you look in here, you can tell these are the peaks. This is the basin, peaks, basin, peaks, basin. And yeah, I see something, and I just know this from doing what I do. Ignore my crop right now. I'm just going to go ahead and do what I normally do. Let me get my chat out of the way here, or where's my menu? Let me move myself. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flip it because I have a feeling my pattern's going to change. So I'm going to flip it vertically, and I like my things coming in from the left, so I'm going to flip it horizontally. And all of a sudden, maybe it's just my eyes. I don't know if anyone can confirm this, but all of a sudden now we almost have a puffy paint texture. So instead of having those basins and peaks, now we almost have you almost feel like you can reach out with your hand and like run your fingers over this. And this is kind of what I saw in this image.
You're not crazy.
I'm not crazy. Okay, good. Thanks, Nick. That makes me feel better. So this is something I want to stress about abstract images. If you were taking Mount Rushmore and you were saying, oh, I don't like George Washington on set, I'm going to flip it. Obviously, people are going to know. But with these abstract images, it's all based on your comfort level and your level of ethics with your own photos. But this is about as extreme as I go. But I love doing this with my abstracts, especially my sand dune abstracts, because in just one flip, all of a sudden you change the perspective of this pattern and you can almost have 2 separate images represent 2 different things. So don't be afraid to flip your images if you're comfortable with it. Something else I tend to do with my abstracts, I'll just show you guys now. I like taking them into Photoshop and I will warp corners. We can't always get things 100% in the field. No one should ever judge you for your artwork. It's your artwork. And I used to feel guilty for doing this, but on my abstracts, I do it a lot now because, I could have changed my position in the field. Maybe I just wasn't seeing it quite right. But, we have fresh eyes when we put our images into Lightroom, and sometimes we see things. So I'm going to, I already duplicated that. I'm going to go up and I'm just going to warp because you know what? I don't really care for this. I don't want to clone it. Sometimes when you go ahead and clone things, it can get really weird. Like you can see we have repeating patterns here now. So I don't want to do that. So I'm going to warp. So I'm going to go ahead up to edit. I'm going to go to transform and I'm going to warp this out. And just a little tug. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of see, maybe I don't like that corner. It starts to stretch a little bit, but that's okay. For time's sake, I'll just do that. I don't like horizontal lines in my abstracts coming close to my edge, so I will hide them. That doesn't bother me too much right there, but if I do, and then I don't have to clone that little thing, you can see, you can, whatever you're comfortable with. But just for time's sake, since you guys have been sitting with me for 2 hours, I'm not going to do too much more, but don't be afraid to use that. I mean, sometimes like I showed up here, you just can't clone it out without giving yourself extra work. I could have moved a different way. I could have positioned my camera differently. Maybe I just didn't see it in the field. But this is one of the biggest takeaways that I've learned from photographing my abstracts. And I don't flip every single one. And it's usually just my sand ones that I screw around with. But nobody's going to call you out by saying, oh my God, you flipped that. I saw that. And that is not the direction that sand was going. It's okay. Abstracts are abstract, they're a departure from reality anyway. So if by warping a corner kind of like helps your composition, or by flipping it, all of a sudden you see something, with visual flow, some people like their lines coming out of the left-hand corner. Sometimes things just work better, if you put things on the right side. Don't be afraid to do that with your images. And next time you have a unique sand abstract, go ahead and flip it and you'll, see this. And it's just pretty crazy. If I were to flip this back, I know I did horizontal, but just for, oh my gosh, my brain is going to mush. Yeah, there we go, image rotation. I'm just going to flip it back. And all of a sudden now you're back to the concaves. So yeah, so take the time, go ahead and, look at your abstracts from all sorts of different angles and yeah, just explore. And my number one tip with Lightroom is just play with sliders, get comfortable with things. Videos are super helpful, but in the end, figuring out where you want your images to go and what you want to do with them is probably the hardest part. But you'll get there. It all takes time. And when I get stuck, I just ask David. I have my own Lightroom expert. So yeah, there's a lot of,
I don't want to accuse you of cheating, but your partner being a Lightroom expert is
yeah. But it doesn't have to be complicated. Yeah. So.
No, and I think that's a key part of why I've been asking for people in this phase of it to demonstrate their processing, not as, we had Nick Page and Sean Bagshaw in the post-processing, and those guys are masters, not, and from a wide perspective of what they do, but a lot of the work, especially in the work that, you do and some of the other people, is a lot about simplicity and that those simple edits, and we overcomplicate things sometimes as we post-process. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit of your insight and your thoughts on that. And then also appreciate you spending a little extra time with the group.
Of course.
Lots of positive comments in the chat. I'll send you a chat log tomorrow. But a lot of people really connected to it or saw Dunes in different ways. Very nice presentations and so on and so forth. So definitely
thank you guys.
So yeah, and I couldn't even hear the cat, FYI. So
oh my gosh, she was like right here screaming. Oh my gosh. Been quiet.
There we go. Yeah, and you got some of the hardest critics like Barbara, and you probably already know Barbara from Nature.
Oh, I love Barbara. Yes, yeah, let's go to the Dunes, Barb. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. So, but no, lots of good stuff all the way through there. So for those of you still with us, we know we had some people drop off, and I appreciate them even notifying us they're dropping off. Presentation will come out to you tomorrow. And then Jennifer hopefully will send you out a follow-up of any other information as well. So
yes, I had I had like a slide with my contact info. But yeah, I'm always open to email. Please answer or ask me any questions you want. I always love answering them, but it's Jennifer@exploringexposure.com. I'm sure you can, maybe you can send it out with the recording.
Yep, for sure.
And my website is just jenniferrenwick.com. And you can find links to workshops and other offerings, and they'll link you to Exploring Exposure from there. But
yeah, exactly. And I can't say enough great things about David and Jennifer. So David was in our winter series. They do a lot for the nature photography community. Fantastic educators. Jennifer's also involved with Out of Chicago. And people ask me, hey, when are you going to do a workshop in Yellowstone? And I say, well, I'm not doing any workshops until those guys stop doing workshops, because your guys, they do a way better job than I ever could do up there. So,
Oh, thanks, Nick.
But so glad to have you. Go feed the cat. Tell David
Yeah.
hi, and we'll hopefully see you back here again for a future topic in the future. So,
All right. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It was good meeting you all.
yep.
Thanks, Nick.
All right. See you, Jennifer. Bye.
All right.
Bye, all.
Bye.